outside the House. So I'm afraid on that score I can't assist him further. We now come to motion number 1 relating to business of the House. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is as on the order paper. Does many of that opinion say aye?
Aye.
Contrary, no. Ayes have it. 10 o'clock motion, Minister to move formally.
We do need to move.
I'm told I don't need to move. That was exciting. And I call the Minister to move the motion for the address.
I'm most grateful, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that a humble address be presented to His Majesty, welcoming the return of the devolved institutions in Northern Ireland, reaffirming the importance of upholding the Belfast Good Friday Agreement 1998 in all its strands, acknowledging the foundational importance of the Acts of Union 1800, including the economic provisions under Article 6 of those Acts, and recognising that, consistent with Section 23(1) of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, executive power in Northern Ireland shall continue to be vested in His Majesty, and that joint authority is not provided for in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in respect of the UK and Irish governments. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to just say to the House, and particularly the right honourable gentleman opposite, that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, would have wanted to be here to move this motion, but he is, of course, travelling as he returns from a regional cabinet meeting, so he sends his apologies. Mr Speaker, we have now seen the return of the devolved institutions in Northern Ireland following the publication of the Safeguarding the Union command paper last month. I believe I will speak for the whole House in welcoming these extremely positive developments after Northern Ireland has been without a devolved government for 2 years. And I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, and, if I may say so, especially the Deputy First Minister, Emma Little-Pengelly, who, of course, we all know from her time in this House. I wish them both every success, and if I may say so personally, I think the whole nation who have paid attention will be, if I may say so, astonished at the brilliance with which they're working together, despite their differences on the constitutional question, and I, for one, am absolutely delighted. As we've already seen, what can be done when what can be done when the political parties are back in government, working together to deliver for those who elect them. Aided by the £3.3 billion funding package from the UK government, the Executive has already decided to allocate over £685 million to allow conversations to commence between employers and trade unions in relation to public sector pay. The UK Government's significant, fair and generous spending settlement will also allow the Northern Ireland Executive to stabilise public services, better manage public finances, increase opportunities for improved infrastructure and investment, and pave the way for the transformation of public services. I look forward very much to working with the new First Minister, Deputy First Minister and all their ministerial colleagues to deliver these shared objectives, and I eagerly await the Executive's sustainability plan for Northern Ireland's finances, including proposals for revenue raising, following the Secretary of State's discussions with the political parties on these issues at Hillsborough Castle before Christmas. And Mr Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I beg your pardon, I move this humble address today to welcome the return of devolution and further to honour the Government's commitment in the command paper to provide a mechanism for Parliament to affirm its commitment to the Acts of Union and to outline that there is no basis in the Belfast Agreement for joint authority arrangements with the Government of Ireland. The UK Government's commitment to the Belfast Agreement in its totality and in all its facets is resolute and unfaltering, and I give way.
For giving way. This humble address reads like a love letter to the DUP. I would just caution them not to get too comfortable, because I'm not sure it's going to be a forever love. A couple of weeks ago, the Secretary of State said in this House that we needed a majority of the consent of both the Unionist community and the Nationalist community to achieve constitutional change in Ireland. I wrote to him after that, asking him to correct the record. He wrote back to me, correcting it to me, because of course we only need a simple majority to see constitutional change in Ireland, but he hasn't corrected the record in this House. Would the Minister take the opportunity right now to do that, please?
I will, Mr Deputy Speaker, correct the record. All that is required is a simple majority, just as the Honourable Gentleman says, and I'm sure we all regret the confusion that's arisen. I've got some words later in the speech specifically to some of the points that he's raised, but I will return to those in due course if you'll allow me. The restoration of the Strand 1 institutions is welcome news, and I'm hopeful that we will soon also see the North-South Ministerial Council and other Strand 2 implementation bodies return to full operation alongside the meetings of the British Irish Council and the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference that are already scheduled to take place in the coming months and which I've attended in the past. It is this three-stranded approach, this delicate and careful balance, that honours the spirit and the letter of the agreement, providing a fitting tribute to those brave men and women who some 26 years ago helped to deliver the agreement that is the bedrock of so much peace and stability and progress in Northern Ireland. Mr Deputy Speaker, this humble address also rightly acknowledges the foundational importance of the Acts of Union 1800, including the economic provisions under Article 6 of those Acts. The Government is clear that the new arrangements committed to in the command paper, including the UK internal market system, ensure the smooth flow of trade across the UK. The House will know we have already legislated to those ends. The final part of this humble address relates to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. It is important as Unionists that this Government emphasise how much Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom is valued and respected, both in law and in practice. Nevertheless, our appreciation of Northern Ireland within the UK is set in the context of respecting the core principles and relationships at the heart of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. At the heart of that agreement is the principle of consent. This means that Northern Ireland will remain an integral part of the United Kingdom, with the Acts of Union and the economic rights under Article 6 properly respected and protected in law, with the sovereignty of Parliament undiminished, ruling out joint authority between London and Dublin, which we will not countenance. I will give way.
Very grateful to the Minister for giving way. The Secretary of State, when I last asked him in this House, assured us that this House can now legislate for VAT in Northern Ireland, which was a very welcome assurance. Can the Minister explain how far the EU can go in legislating for Northern Ireland if we in the Unionist community are not very happy with it?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I just refer my right honourable friends to the command paper, to the table on page 4, which I think I'd ask you to answer his question somewhat more broadly. The table compares Northern Ireland to Ireland as an illustrative member state and Norway as an EEA state, and goes through the ways in which the status of Northern Ireland EU membership and EEA membership differ. And I think for anyone looking at that table, they can see that Northern Ireland is in a completely different place. When it comes to answering my right honourable friend on the specific issue of the extent to which Northern Ireland can be legislated for by the EU, I would refer him to the democratic consent mechanism for the overall arrangement, the first vote on which will take place later in the year, and also to the Stormont break, to which we could return, but which we have covered in previous debates. I know my right honourable friend, of course, very well from a number of years. I've followed his thoughts on this issue since some years before I was a member, and I'm reluctant to give him a very specific answer on the issue of VAT, because I know that he will have followed the details, and the last thing I want to do is to give him an incorrect answer.
Well, I've had his answer on that.
What I would like to do is have a meeting with my right honourable friend, if he will agree, because I'm very clear that the scope of law which can apply in Northern Ireland is that which is necessary to ensure the smooth flow of goods. If I may just finish this one point. I've said before at this dispatch box that we were always going to have special arrangements for Northern Ireland. When I resigned from the then government in 2018, the issue which I forced amongst our colleagues in the European Research Group was the issue of Northern Ireland, and we wrote a paper which said there would need to be alternative administrative and technical arrangements so that there could be an open border with the Republic of Ireland. We understood that there would be special arrangements. There was never going to be an open border with no arrangements to deal with that open border. There was never going to be a hard border. It was always going to be necessary to do something unique and special in Northern Ireland. And as I've also said at this dispatch box, had this country gone forward with one united voice in accepting the referendum result, had this country enjoyed the good quality of relations with Ireland and the EU which we enjoy today, then we might have done better than leaving in place some EU law in Northern Ireland, and I wish we had. But I think after all that we've been through and the 8 years that it's taken to do it, I think that this settlement taken overall, the Windsor framework, plus the command paper, including the humble address which we deal with today, I think overall this is the moment to bank what I regard as a win and to move forward constructively in the best interests of all the people of the UK, but also the people of the Republic of Ireland too.
But can I just reassure you, the Secretary of State gave me a very clear assurance in this House that we can legislate for VAT for Northern Ireland, so I'm not quite sure why he was querying that.
Well, he has given us that clear. I think that the reason that I have some nervousness when talking to my right honourable friend is because of the extent and difficulty of the walk he and I have had together. I know how powerfully he feels on these issues. I'm very clear that the EU can only legislate in relation to that goods law which remains in place. We've had the very clear assurance on VAT. And if he's got any further doubts or concerns about this, I would appreciate the opportunity to sit down with him, go through it in great detail, answer all the questions that he has, and make sure that even if he's not 100% satisfied, because as I've said, I think now, this possibly is the 5th or 6th time, I know that leaving in place some EU law in Northern Ireland is a hard compromise for Unionists and Eurosceptics. It is a hard compromise for me, as I know it is a hard compromise for him. But nevertheless, 8 years on, we have delivered what I would regard as alternative arrangements in Northern Ireland, something which we were once told was magical thinking and worthy of unicorns. I give way, of course.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister of State for giving way. Does he join me in welcoming the fact that we now have currently in the Assembly the first applicability motion which is being brought before the Assembly, which is a change to the previous arrangements, which enables the Assembly to vote on whether a change to an EU law can apply in Northern Ireland, and that furthermore, under the auspices of the Democratic Scrutiny Committee newly established in the Assembly will be able to block the application of new EU law, refer it to the UK Government for further consideration, and that ultimately the UK Government can veto that law being applied in Northern Ireland. And whilst imperfect, these arrangements represent very substantial progress from where we were, which was an automatic pipeline of EU law with no opportunity for scrutiny, no opportunity to block or veto that law, and we're certainly in a better place than when we were before these new arrangements.
Right, honourable friend, and of course I do, as he says, welcome these arrangements, and I was very pleased to give instruction to my officials that the Assembly should be notified. Beyond that, on the particular measure, I don't wish to go any further at all, because I'm absolutely determined that this should be a matter for the Assembly, with the UK Government stepping back and leaving it to the democratic consent of MLAs. I will give way once more, but then I think I should perhaps make a little more progress.
I thank the member for giving way. However, I do say that the Minister doesn't want to be that position where he's the gift that keeps on giving to certain people. And I would like clarity on this issue of VAT, because it was cleared up from the dispatch box before that the EU would have no say on VAT matters. And the Minister of the Crown should be able to say from that dispatch box that the EU has no impact, no say whatsoever with the issue of VAT. And I come to this very directly from a constituent who's already written to me, and in the last 2 weeks has received notification that with regards to purchase of machinery, that before he can do that, he has to provide an EROI. That's a Republic of Ireland VAT mechanism. He doesn't trade in the Republic of Ireland. He's nothing to do with the Republic of Ireland, yet he's been asked by our authorities to provide an EROI before he purchases equipment in the United Kingdom for trade within the United Kingdom. This has to be cleared up. It has to be cleared up pretty fast.
I'm most grateful, Mr Deputy Speaker. The assurance was given on VAT. I stand by that assurance. The particular circumstances which he's just shared with me, I was not aware of before this moment. Again, I would encourage him either to write to me or come and see me, perhaps do both. And let's get to the bottom of it, because one thing I'm sure of, we want to get through all these tricky issues as smoothly and as transparently and as effectively as possible in the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland, because it really is time to move on, get public services reformed, get the government there onto a sustainable basis and allow people to get on with life as usual. I must give way to him once more, but then I will finish, I think.
It's actually in the humble address, and the government seem to be going out of their way, both in the command paper and the humble address, to make the point that in the Good Friday Agreement or the Northern Ireland Act of '98 there is no provision for joint authority. Of course, we all know, those of us who've been around long enough, that many things have changed since then, not least at St Andrews. But that aside, would he confirm to this House that there's also no provision in the Good Friday Agreement or the '98 Act for direct rule from London?
One is, of course, a matter for the United Kingdom, and while Northern Ireland is within the United Kingdom, I think everyone would expect us to make Northern Ireland work within the UK. But yes, whilst that there's no provision for direct rule, I just would gently point out to him, we went to some lengths at some cost not to return to direct rule at this time. You know, we have allowed events to evolve as they have, precisely because we did not wish to turn to direct rule. And I think, you know, we are now extremely grateful that there is a returned executive in Northern Ireland. But, you know, we do have a responsibility to all of the citizens of Northern Ireland to make sure that they are governed effectively, and that's why we put in place the arrangements that we did. I, for one, am grateful that we didn't have to go any further. Oh, my word, we're going to have a general debate on the Belfast.
Thank you very much. Very grateful to the Minister. His remark about making sure Northern Ireland works for all its citizens has sparked me to life on this one. I wanted to ask him to set out the government's approach to the issue of reform of the institutions. As he knows, the Northern Affairs Committee did a very comprehensive report on the issue, which the government to date has simply said, effectively, we note. There is still the risk of collapse of the institutions. The same reasons that allowed them to collapse in the past are still there, and hopefully they don't collapse, but that is a danger. So can the Minister assure us that he and his colleagues will work closely with the Irish Government and the parties in Northern Ireland to ensure that we have a proper examination of the rules around the institutions, to make sure that we don't end up in the same mess we've had twice over the past 7 years?
Well, that's great. I think after this I will just plunge further into my speech, because I do want to conclude it. Our position is very clear that any change must come from the parties in Northern Ireland. Now, that's not to say we're disinterested. I've personally been through an exercise of considering all of the possible reforms that there could be. But at the end of that quite lengthy exercise, I reached the conclusion that no plan for reform of the institutions and their operation would work if it was driven by yours truly. It's essential that this conversation comes from the parties in Northern Ireland, and I don't doubt that we will wish to note and take interest in such a conversation, but it really is for him and his colleagues, who are well represented on the benches opposite, to move such a conversation forward. It's not something that the UK government will be driving forward. I think it's vitally important that the new executive has the space now to get on with governing Northern Ireland and doing what is very much needed. I said I was going to press on. He's the first colleague from our side on this theme, so I will.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. The member for Foyle earlier described his statement as a love letter to the DUP. I saw it more as a love letter to Northern Ireland and the huge opportunities that can be seized from realising what he and his colleagues working with all parties in Northern Ireland have managed to pull together. Does the Minister agree with me that actually there is a very interesting statistic about Northern Ireland this year, which is the huge increase in the number of businesses registered there? I think it's up 60% in Northern Ireland in the last year alone, and surely this is a great sign of confidence that the people and the businesses themselves have in the opportunities in Northern Ireland now.
I certainly agree at the extraordinary opportunity which is before Northern Ireland. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the Northern Ireland Act 1998 are explicit that any change to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland would require the consent of a simple majority of its people. The UK government is absolutely clear that there is no basis to suggest that at present a majority of people in Northern Ireland wish to separate from the UK. Our position is therefore straightforward. Northern Ireland has a bright and prosperous future within the Union for as long as the people of Northern Ireland wish it. That position does not diminish the right of others to pursue through democratic and peaceful means their aspiration for other outcomes. We all remain committed to building and strengthening the three sets of relationships at the heart of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The restoration of the political institutions at Stormont will enable the critical relationships across and between the communities in Northern Ireland to be strengthened, with vital work on building reconciliation to be taken forward in the months and years ahead. There are new opportunities to strengthen cooperation in the relationship between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland from outside the EU. This cooperation does not threaten Northern Ireland's constitutional status, but it can help to build economic prosperity and deliver vital investment in infrastructure. As a UK government, we also recognise the need to invest in East-West relationships, not only within the United Kingdom, as with the new UK East-West Council, but also through the other institutions, such as the British-Irish Council and the Intergovernmental Conference. I give way.
And heartened to hear what the Minister has just said there in relation to the importance of the East-West connections. I think sometimes there isn't enough emphasis on the East-West connections, and I'm very keen to hear what the Minister will do to ensure that those happen with a much more concrete attitude. Also the issue of Ulster Scots and the culture as well. And it's important not only with an East-West, but also with an East-West and a US of A. And those are some of the things that I feel we should be doing. Thank you.
So, Deputy Speaker, I know we will hear from my honourable friend many times on these issues, and I know that he's got a great deal to contribute on it. What I shall do is see to it, particularly with this new role I have jointly with the Cabinet Office, I shall see to it that the command paper is vigorously implemented. All the strength that I can muster to get it done at a speed which suits him and suits me, and I shall seek to update the House in due course as we make progress. But I certainly will want the whole House and all of the people of Northern Ireland to know what we're doing, when we're doing it, and to see that we're making progress with vigour, and I certainly commit to doing that. I have had this joint role with the Windsor Framework Task Force for a week, and I have made some progress, but I hope you will understand I'm not ready today to commit to a timeline to all of the institutions being up and running, but we certainly will proceed with vigour. Our exit from the EU should not mean that cooperation and friendship are diminished, but rather, I believe it compels us all to work harder to invest in and strengthen all of the relationships that are important to the peoples within these islands and across Europe. Our independent status should in no way diminish our friendship. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I commend this humble address to the House.
Question is that an humble address be presented to His Majesty as on the order paper. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, whether this humble address is or is not a love letter to anyone, I will leave for others to debate, but it certainly can be described as a coda to the recent restoration of the institutions in Northern Ireland. As we've heard from the Minister, it addresses a number of matters which I shall briefly touch upon, but can I make it clear at the beginning that on this side of the House we will be supporting it. Now, this is our first opportunity as a House to welcome the return of devolved government, and I wish to acknowledge the leadership of the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley in recognising that for the sake of Northern Ireland and its people, the DUP needed to return to government, and for arguing the case for that course of action so persuasively. Now, the Secretary of State and I have both had the pleasure of meeting the new First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and I must say I agree with the Minister that they have made a very positive start and have set the tone for what we all hope will be a constructive and productive administration. And I join him in wishing both of them, together with the other executive members and indeed the whole Assembly, every success in their responsibilities, because their task, our task, collectively is to ensure that this restoration endures. Let us be frank, however. I hope people will also recognise that never again should Northern Ireland find themselves without their Assembly and without their devolved government. It is also right that we should reaffirm our support for the Good Friday Agreement in all of its strands and dimensions. It is important for us to do so because the agreement made possible the considerable progress we have seen in Northern Ireland, including in the establishment of power sharing. I think it's also needed because there was a perception that some of the language in the recent command paper was not wholly in keeping with the spirit of shared commitment. And I want to raise just one section of that command paper, which I did find genuinely puzzling, and that was what it said about the all-island economy and the government's commitment to remove the legal duties to have regard to the all-island economy in Section 10(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018. Now, that section of the Withdrawal Act actually refers to having, quote, due regard, end of quote, to the joint report from the negotiators of the European Union and the United Kingdom government on progress during phase 1 of the negotiations under Article 50 on the United Kingdom's orderly withdrawal from the European Union. It's a report that runs to 15 pages, but there appears, as far as I can see, to be only one reference in it to the all-island economy, and that is to be found in the last 2 lines of paragraph 49. So could the Minister explain in responding what would be the effect of repealing Section 10(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 when that section of the Act refers to the whole of the joint report and not just to the reference in paragraph 49 to the all-island economy? Does that mean that ministers would no longer have to have regard to anything at all in the joint report? Well, surely that cannot be the case. Or is what the government is saying that it wishes to remove the reference to the all-island economy in paragraph 49, in which case, given that it was a joint report agreed between the United Kingdom and the European Union, have ministers told the EU of their intentions? And to follow up, when might we see the legislation and the new statutory guidance? Now, no one is in any doubt that Northern Ireland does far more trade with the UK internal market than it does with Ireland, and that will continue to be the case. But it is also evident that trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic has increased since we left the European Union. And that tells us that the all-Ireland economy is both a fact and greatly to the benefit of businesses and people in Northern Ireland, whether that is milk from Northern Ireland going south to be processed, or Coca-Cola produced in the firm's flagship plant in Lisbon being sold all over Ireland and beyond, or Guinness coming north from Dublin. And of course I will give way.
Giving way, and he has rightly identified one of the impacts of the Windsor Framework and the Northern Ireland Protocol, namely that trade is now being diverted to the Irish Republic, as firms in Northern Ireland find it more difficult to link with their supply chains in GB and are forced to look at supplies from the Irish Republic, supplies which some of the people who are now purchasing from the Republic tell me are more expensive and of lower quality.
The first point I would make to the honourable gentleman is the 3 examples I've just given have nothing to do with the Northern Ireland Protocol or the Windsor Framework at all. They were all pre-existing facts of the all-island economy, and one which those businesses, Mr Deputy Speaker, welcome, because it is the ability to trade and find markets and sell their goods and make a return. Secondly, the honourable gentleman returns, understandably, to the essential problem that the Protocol and the Windsor Framework have been trying to address, and it's the point that the Minister made openly in his speech. Once we left the European Union, there was an issue about the border, and one way or another, a way had to be found to ensure that goods moving across that non-existent border complied with the rules of the single market. And the government, the current government, under a previous Prime Minister, made a choice as to how it was going to be done. And I strongly support the Windsor Framework precisely because it is an important step forward in trying to make that trade, as the Minister referred to, as easy as possible for businesses. And I just make this point because many businesses don't really understand why the phrase all-island economy should provoke such strong feelings, especially when there has recently been a warm welcome to the allocations from the Shared Ireland Fund for cross-community projects that will strengthen the all-island economy, including the much-needed improvement to the A5, a more regular train service between Belfast and Dublin, the narrow water bridge connecting the counties of Down and Meath, and a contribution to the building of Casement Park, so that in 4 years' time we can all of us celebrate Northern Ireland helping to host the European Football Championship. Nevertheless, we warmly endorse this renewed commitment to the Good Friday Agreement contained in the humble address, which was, of course, the then government's extraordinary achievement with all of the parties who were involved in the negotiation almost 26 years ago. And it is only right that we should remind ourselves as a country of the peace it has created and of the obligations we took on when we signed it, including, as the Minister has said, recognition that the future constitutional status of Northern Ireland is a matter for the people of Northern Ireland alone. And that with our co-guarantor, the Irish government, we have a shared interest in continuing to promote peace, prosperity and progress, north and south. Now, on the next section, I wondered in passing when I read the humble address when the Acts of Union 1800 were last referred to in a motion put forward by the government. But in the light of recent events, I felt I should familiarise myself with the original Acts, although they have, of course, been considerably amended since. The Act of Union Ireland 1800 is, by modern standards, very short. They knew how to say things much more briefly than we seem to manage in these days, and it contains a number of interesting provisions, including the application of tariffs and excise on certain categories of goods moving between Great Britain and Ireland, a point that the Right Honourable Gentleman for Lagan Valley raised with me when we debated the matter recently. Now, I don't think anyone wants to restore tariffs and excise on certain categories of goods moving. I don't think anyone wants to restore Section 21 of the Government of Ireland Act 1920, which required that movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland be treated as imports and exports for the purposes of forms to be used and the information to be furnished. And as we were told, customs officers were instructed to conduct physical inspections of ships with daily sailings twice weekly. And how many people even recall that in 1947, the Stormont Parliament introduced a requirement that workers from Great Britain would require a work permit to go and work in Northern Ireland. Now, these are not just interesting historical facts, but as the command paper's very informative annex pointed out, congratulations to the civil servants who did the research that drafted it, the Acts of Union have not been a guarantor at all times of free and unfettered movements of goods and people over the centuries, but instead have framed a slightly more complex relationship than is sometimes suggested. Of course I will give way.
I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way. He is absolutely right in what he is saying, which is why in our 7 test we talked about fulfilling the Acts of Union, whilst others who hadn't bothered to read the original Acts of Union, who didn't know what they were talking about, who seek to rewrite history, who declare themselves as the champions of unionism but don't know their facts, talked about restoring something that would mean customs checks on goods moving between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, would mean tariffs on goods manufactured in Northern Ireland being sold in Great Britain. This is the kind of nonsense that our detractors daily pump out. They should check their facts, know their history and understand what they're talking about, Mr Deputy Speaker.
say to the right honourable gentleman, we've just had a wonderful example of the persuasive power of his argument. And, you know, whoever we are, whatever view we hold, getting your facts right is really quite basic to doing our job in this place. And that is why it is important, especially in the context of Northern Ireland, to get your facts right. Now, I turn now to the last part of the humble address. And it is simply talking about facts, a statement of fact that this House retains the right to legislate in respect of Northern Ireland, and it is simply a fact that the Good Friday Agreement and the 1998 Northern Ireland Act do not provide for joint authority with the Irish government over what happens inside Northern Ireland. This is also acknowledged by the Irish government. But at the same time, we must do, and I welcome what the Minister said, all that we can to foster and strengthen the shared institutions established under Strand 3 of the Good Friday Agreement, not least because we have made most progress on this difficult matter when we have had a close working relationship with the Irish government. So in conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, in returning to the first section of the humble address, can I just simply say that I look forward to working with all members of this House, and I mean all, and of the Northern Ireland Assembly, and also with the Executive, as we together turn our minds to the task in hand, which is now very simply to build a brighter and a better future for the people of Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I've almost lost count of the number of times I've taken to my feet in this chamber to mouth the words that Northern Ireland is governed best when it's governed locally, but now we can in fact actually say that that is going to be the case. And no doubt there are, in terms of the agreement, the settlement that has been reached, there will be imperfections, compromises and asymmetries, and there will be elements that are not for the self-appointed purists, and certainly there is enough there for the pragmatists to allow the progress to be made that needs to be made. Over the course of my time speaking off the front bench for my party on Northern Irish issues, I've had the great pleasure of serving as a member of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly, and much bandwidth in that organisation has understandably been taken up with Brexit and the aftermath, the resulting fallout, and indeed many of the occasional falling outs that have resulted. But when my committee met in Edinburgh last week, there was a definite change of tone in the conversations outside the formal business. And I hope I'm not putting words in any of the members' mouths by saying that there was a pleasure, a realism, certainly an optimism, definitely a realism about recent developments. But the key thing was that nobody was any longer asking about when might Stormont return, but rather what would now be done by Stormont to improve the lot of people in Northern Ireland now that it had returned. And within the agreement, one of the areas that leaps out, and which I would hope could be ministers will in time expand on their vision for it, but the East-West Council to deal with matters of business, education and culture across that East-West access, because certainly from even the perspective of a hard-bitten Scottish nationalist like myself, that opens up a great deal of useful space potentially to share and develop all that we have in common, all that we continue to have in common, and all that we will have in common and which will endure regardless as to wherever our respective constitutional journeys might happen to conclude in future. Of course.
Thank you for giving way. Part of that engagement that the Honourable Gentleman and I had together was his visit to my constituency of Strangford, where the Honourable Gentleman had the opportunity to look at joint issues that we could agree on. For instance, fishing issues for visas for the fishermen, on cultural issues. We took him to meet many community groups and other organisations as well. I think the Honourable Gentleman, and does he agree, perhaps that one of the important things for him and I were that we could see, although we have different opinions on the Constitution, there are many, many things that we can agree on.
Thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. And yes, it is when you put the Constitution to one side, there are indeed very many issues that can be agreed on or worked on together. And that's why I find that the space that council might offer quite compelling, and it's certainly something of great interest. And I think that now that politics has indeed moved on to in Northern Ireland, it's perhaps time for me to hop on the Logan Air flight from Aberdeen once again to to perhaps renew some acquaintances that have been made previously. I would just say many words that we heard throughout the Brexit debate, throughout where Northern Ireland found itself snagged, was we often heard an expression, a rather boilerplate expression about a precious union, and that struck to my ears. There were words which were very easy and perhaps too easy at times for many in this place to pay a lip service to without actually following through on them in practice. Because it's very, very easy to say things sometimes. It's much, much harder to actually reflect. And it seemed, certainly to us, that where the desire for a particular form of Brexit, which was favoured only by a small minority hiding behind a small majority in one part of the Union, it was given primacy and priority and were allowed to prevail over the clear wishes of other constituent parts of the Union. And that is something that has, for many, however they voted in the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, reopened that debate and encouraged them to reappraise the position that they might have taken at that time. Now, I can certainly understand why the humble address before us is worded in the manner as it has been. And the key word, as the Minister has in effect conceded, that was implied but left unspoken in that wording, was that of consent, where it applies to the executive power being vested in His Majesty. And that's very interesting to me for another number of reasons, because union by consent is how many of us in Scotland also understand our position in the Union to work. But unlike Northern Ireland, we have nothing similar in statute to the wording of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, explaining what happens if a majority of those voting in Scotland were to express a wish to cease to be part of the UK. Now, I would contend that in all parts of the Union there has to be a way to demonstrate how consent has been withdrawn, if indeed consent is being withdrawn by the people. And in maintaining that consent, I would just make the observation, based on events of the last few days, that just like this Parliament itself, that will be judged by how it treats its minorities and how the institution in the Union is being seen to act with integrity in all that it does. So, in conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, we on the SNP benches wish the people of Northern Ireland and their institutions well, and we look forward to seeing their politicians and those institutions playing a full role in those bodies, be they North and South, be they East and West, and seeing the Good Friday Agreement in all its strands moving forward as we always hoped it would, to allow a peaceful, prosperous Northern Ireland to continue to come to terms with its past and be at ease in building its shared future, whatever its people decide that future ought to look like.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Minister of State for leading this debate today, for the words that he has said, to the Shadow Secretary of State as well. It's good to hear that common approach when it comes to recognising the settled will of the people of Northern Ireland, and that is that we should remain part of the United Kingdom. That does not prevent others from pursuing, by peaceful and democratic means, their aspirations, but it is clear, and this Parliament is reflecting the settled will of the people of Northern Ireland. And I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is my first time in almost 27 years in this House that I've heard great clarity spoken in terms of the government's approach to Northern Ireland, its desire to value Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, and for as long as it is the will of the people of Northern Ireland that we bind our union together more strongly so that it delivers for everyone. And that is what we are in the business of doing, and it is delivering for all the people of Northern Ireland. And so I welcome the motion before us this evening. I welcome its reaffirmation of the constitutional basis for Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, whether that be the Acts of Union, whether that be the 1998 Northern Ireland Act, enshrining within it the principle of consent, which was long fought for by Unionists in Northern Ireland, which was undermined by the Northern Ireland Protocol, and to hear that reasserted and reaffirmed is important for people in Northern Ireland to hear and to understand that this is the position not only of the Government of the United Kingdom, but of His Majesty's loyal opposition as well. Because those core principles at the heart of the Belfast Agreement are important to preserve. And it was frustrating for us, Mr Deputy Speaker, when we had the European Union claiming that the protocol was designed to safeguard the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement and the political institutions, when in fact it had the opposite effect, because it did not have the support or consent of the Unionist community. And so I welcome the return of devolution in Northern Ireland. I am a committed devolutionist. I believe that a properly functioning devolved government delivering for all our people will cement Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom, because people will be comfortable living, working and raising their family in the place that we call home. And I believe that the decision to foist the protocol in Northern Ireland, which had been rejected by every single Unionist MLA, was a mistake, and I'm glad that we've gone a long way towards correcting the harm that was done by the protocol to Northern Ireland, to the very delicate political balances at the heart of how Northern Ireland operates, and underpinning once again the principles, such as the principle of consent, that ensure Northern Ireland moves forward on the basis of a cross-community consensus. That is how power sharing operates. That's how devolution can deliver for people in Northern Ireland. And I think the lesson from Northern Ireland over the last 25 years is the need for that consensus from both Unionists and Nationalists at every major juncture. And this is a universal lesson in any divided society. Indeed, in 2019, in this House, the former member for North Belfast, now the noble Lord Dodds, stood in this House and warned us that to proceed with a deal with only the support of one side would be a short-term fix and would undermine devolution in the long term. And he was right. And that's why it's important that we all commit ourselves today never to do this again, that we do what we can always to underpin and strengthen the need for that cross-community consensus in Northern Ireland, because we believe that Northern Ireland will only move forward when we move forward together. Leaving one side behind only stores up problems for the future. Mr Deputy Speaker, many believed that we would not succeed in renegotiating the protocol, and indeed at times we were warned, not least by the Irish government and others, that that would simply not happen. And I am pleased that thanks to the decisive action that was taken by my party, we did get to a point where the EU came back to the negotiating table, where progress was made. And we built now upon that progress through the measures that have been set forward in the command paper safeguarding the Union. Our objective was to remove the border within the UK internal market, those unnecessary checks on goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and remaining within the United Kingdom. There was no need for the checks and the customs procedures that were imposed under the protocol, because those goods were not leaving the United Kingdom. They did not present a risk to the European Union and its single market. And of course, combining the desire and the objective of removing those internal barriers to trade within the United Kingdom internal market was also a desire to ensure that we could continue to have our privileged access to the EU single market. The Shadow Secretary of State was right when he said, of course our biggest market is Great Britain. We sell £12 billion worth of goods each year manufactured in Northern Ireland to Great Britain. We sell £8 billion a year to the European Union. It is an important market for us. It's an important market for businesses in my constituency, and indeed businesses in all of the constituencies of my right honourable and honourable friends on these benches. And therefore, maintaining access to that market is important, but we were always clear that it should not be on the basis that you then restrict access to our biggest market, which is in the rest of the United Kingdom. And I welcome the measures, the legislation that was introduced and has been now been passed by both Houses of Parliament to strengthen our unfettered access to the market in Great Britain and to safeguard our access in terms of our supply chains from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and ensure that where goods are staying within the UK internal market, they flow freely. And we look forward to the further measures and legislation that will be taken forward under the proposals in the command paper to deliver on the government's commitments in relation to the restoration of Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market. I'm not going to go into the detail today, Mr Deputy Speaker. We've rehearsed that well in terms of what the command paper proposes. I do recognise that there remain concerns within Unionist ranks about how this will operate in practice. There is more work to be done. I acknowledge that. We acknowledge that as a party, and we will continue to work together with the government to ensure that where more work is needed, that work is taken forward and completed. And that includes in areas like veterinary medicines, where the Honourable Member for North Antrim has taken a particular interest and will be involved in working with the government in taking forward that piece of work to ensure that Northern Ireland's access to veterinary medicines is protected for the future. There is more work to be done in relation to the so-called red lane, which deals with goods travelling in transit from Great Britain via Northern Ireland into the European Union, or goods that are deemed at risk, for example, intermediate goods used in manufacturing where the product is sold to the European Union. And we need to ensure that the goods travelling into the red lane are only those that are required for the purpose of satisfying the requirements and the standards that the EU set for entry to their single market. And there is more work to be done on that. And I know the Minister will work with us in this, and he's already committed to do that. And we welcome the fact that already, as a result of the recent agreement reached between the UK Government and the European Union, Northern Ireland will benefit from free trade agreements that the UK enters into with other countries, so that goods entering the UK and travelling into Northern Ireland will not have to go through the red lane, will not be subject to checks and customs procedures. That represents over 12,500 tonnes of goods moving across the Irish Sea, some 4 million goods movements that have been removed from the red lane and will be going into the UK internal market system. That's the kind of progress we can make and will continue to make to address the outstanding issues. Of course, I'll give way.
Knows how much I value the work and leadership he has shown, and that point he makes about changes at EU level, the announcement by Maros Sefcovic in the Joint Committee about goods at risk, demonstrates the point that he makes so well, that this isn't just some internal reorganisation, but this has international ramifications, and that really should demonstrate to businesses in Northern Ireland that this is a serious change that will benefit them. And as he says, we can work through the problems and work out some of the other glitches in order to get them resolved as well. I commend him on that point.
Well, I thank the Chairman of the Select Committee for his comments and you know, the challenges we faced as a result of the measures imposed under the protocol, I believe, are now being properly and adequately addressed. For example, many goods made to British standards in Great Britain were banned from our supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland. That is no longer the case. Those British goods made to British standards are now available in our supermarket shelves, and there is more work to be done and more progress to be made in that respect. So this is ongoing work that we will build upon, of course.
Yeah. The Right Honourable Gentleman is making very specific cases in relation to all the goods. Is it the intention through this legislation, I understand it is, but maybe the Right Honourable Member will confirm, that those companies who have stopped selling to Northern Ireland for whatever the reasons may be, the green lanes, the red lanes, I understand that government have a case to go to all of those companies to re-engage and get them to trade in Northern Ireland again. Is that the case?
Well, the Honourable Member for Strangford makes a very important point And I was coming to this, and it is worth, I think, mentioning now, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Not only does the command paper set out the practical and legal changes that will occur that restore Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market, the establishment of the UK East-West Council will also help to bind Northern Ireland more closely into the rest of the United Kingdom. And I welcome the comments by the SNP spokesperson, who takes a keen interest in Northern Ireland and, in fairness to him, recognise, notwithstanding his aspirations in relation to Scotland's future, that there is real value in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England working more closely together, whether it's in trade, sharing our experiences on education, sharing the richness of our heritage and our culture. These are things that are important. And the new East-West Council will ensure that we get a more joined-up approach, that there is more working together, more cooperation across all of the United Kingdom. And then on the specific point the Honourable Member for Strangford makes, the establishment of the new Intertrade UK body will ensure that a proactive approach is taken. In instances where there are businesses in Great Britain that have decided it's not worth the hassle to make their goods available to customers in Northern Ireland, that those businesses will be approached. The Intertrade UK will seek to understand why they're no longer doing business in Northern Ireland and to assist them to restore their trading arrangements with consumers and customers in Northern Ireland.
And just on this point, I think it's really important to emphasise, as an MP that represents an Essex constituency, we have a vast horticultural industry, and they have been prevented from sending their products, their seeds, and all the things that people in Northern Ireland would love to purchase. They've been prevented from doing that. This is a new opportunity for them, and actually, if I may, I would like to praise the government for the engagement, the department itself for the engagement they've had with King Seeds, based in Kelvedon, in my constituency. But this is effectively where we have to work through many of these practical issues that have basically put barriers up, where we know from a people-to-people perspective, we can facilitate trade flows that benefit everyone.
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her intervention and for her ongoing interest in Northern Ireland, which is always great to see. And she is absolutely right. The purpose of Intertrade UK, of course, is not just to deal with issues related to the availability of goods in Northern Ireland, but it covers all of the UK. It will deal with issues on trade between Scotland and England and England and Wales and so on. It is designed in the new environment that we find ourselves to encourage greater trade within the United Kingdom. We have a market here in the United Kingdom in the region of 60 million people. That's a very strong, it's the second biggest market in Europe, and we should be selling more of our own goods to our own people. And the purpose of Intertrade UK is to encourage those enhanced, stronger trading links across all of the United Kingdom, because of course the union is not just a political union, it is an economic union, and it was the economic union in particular that was harmed by the protocol, and that these new measures are designed to restore those trading relationships to a more healthy place. The other point I want to make, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is I think also important, because in welcoming the restoration of the devolved institutions, one of our key difficulties with the protocol was the lack of any democratic input for the political institutions in Northern Ireland, that laws were being applied automatically to Northern Ireland, new laws, changes to law into which Northern Ireland had no say whatsoever. And we welcome the establishment of the Democratic Scrutiny Committee in the Northern Ireland Assembly, which will now have the function to scrutinise laws that are coming forward. It will have the power to stop those laws applying, as I said earlier, in an intervention, and the UK government ultimately has the power of veto if those laws are deemed to be harmful to Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and its internal market. This is all progress. And I note, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that some who were critical of these new arrangements are now complaining that they're not part of, couldn't obtain membership of this new Democratic Scrutiny Committee, a committee they said was powerless, and now they're complaining they can't be in there to be part of it. And furthermore, I note that some of our detractors are now talking about the risk of what they call trivergence. That if the Assembly, exercising its power, vetoes a new law being applied to Northern Ireland, that all of a sudden that might create a problem, insofar as Northern Ireland will have different law from the law in the EU and potentially different law to Great Britain. But of course we know that in the new arrangements that are put in place as a result of the command paper, Northern Ireland goods will be available for sale in Great Britain regardless of the circumstances. There is a goods guarantee built into the legislation that this House has approved, which means that Northern Ireland goods in all circumstances can be sold in Great Britain. But I note that those who said the new arrangements would be ineffective are now complaining that they will be so effective that actually they might be counterproductive to Northern Ireland's interests. Well, look, which is it? You know, they're either effective or they're not. We believe they can be, and we are prepared to test those new mechanisms to ensure that they do protect the interests of everyone in Northern Ireland. I just want to make a few general points, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I move towards a close. We welcome the commitments that the UK Government have given, and including this evening from the front bench, in relation to Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. But I also note that we have much talk of border polls. We have much talk, particularly by Sinn Féin, about the need to have a border poll. And it is worth just recalling the history of Sinn Féin's approach to border polls. Even as far back as 2011, Gerry Adams told us that Northern Ireland will have left the UK by 2016. Well, we're almost 10 years on from that, and we're still in the UK. In August 2021, Gerry had changed 2016 to 2024. Well, 2024 has arrived, and we're still in the United Kingdom. In May 2022, Mary Lou MacDonald called for a border poll by 2027. But then she changed that to 2030. And then just this month, Michelle O'Neill has shifted the Sinn Féin goalposts yet again to call for a border poll by 2034. They recognise the reality, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that it is the settled will of the people of Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. And all this talk of divisive border polls does nothing but it is designed simply to reassure the Sinn Féin base.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Just on the basis of the constitutional future, would you agree with me that the changed Northern Ireland that now exists, there are many, many of us who are proud of our British nationality and will never yield on that. There are others who are proud of their Irishness. And there are many who don't share either constitutional identity. But only membership of the United Kingdom allows people to cherish all three in the way that they do.
Well, I thank the honourable member for East Londonderry for the very powerful point that he makes. The beauty of Northern Ireland today is that we each have the right to identify ourselves in whatever way we deem appropriate. But it is evident that the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland continue to accept that the settled will of the people is to remain part of the United Kingdom. And that should be respected by everyone, regardless of how they identify themselves. But I am clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Unionists, myself included, have a job to do to continue persuading people that the union is best for all. This debate this evening is welcome, but I am clear. Neither Parliament nor the courts will ultimately decide Northern Ireland's future. It is the people of Northern Ireland who will decide our future within the United Kingdom. Our job, as Unionists, is to continue to persuade the majority of people that they are better off in the United Kingdom. And I just say, with great respect to my colleagues in the wider unionism, not on these benches, but out there in the wider unionism, many of them are detractors in the DUP, who attack my party, who attack the stand that we are taking, because we recognise that building a Northern Ireland that works for everyone is the key to securing the Union for the future. A Northern Ireland that is prosperous is the key to securing the Union for the future. And those who are a minority within Unionism, but who live in the days of the 1970s, when Unionism had an inbuilt majority. Northern Ireland is changing. Its demographics are changing. And you only have to look at the results of recent polling to see that. Unionism has to recognise that amongst younger people, support for the Union isn't as strong as it is amongst more senior citizens in Northern Ireland. It is our task to persuade our young people, the next generation, that the Union works for them. But the way we did it in 1970 is not the way we will do it now in 2024 or in 2030 or in 2034. It is about a prosperous Northern Ireland, a Northern Ireland that delivers jobs for our young people, a Northern Ireland that ensures they have the best education and the best start in life, that will deliver support for the Union. That is fundamentally and vitally important. And I think in that regard, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the signs are good. Northern Ireland today is sitting with the lowest unemployment in the United Kingdom of any region outside of London. That is, I think, an impressive indicator of how much Northern Ireland has moved forward. From the days when unemployment was beyond 12%, when we had the highest unemployment in the United Kingdom. That's what Northern Ireland, making Northern Ireland work looks like. Making Northern Ireland work looks like delivering jobs for our young people, driving down unemployment, improving our economy, creating jobs, attracting investment. And we have an opportunity here to do that even better in the future with the new arrangements that we are putting in place. Those are the arguments that will secure the Union for the future. And Unionism needs to do better. We can be proud of Northern Ireland. A Northern Ireland that it is delivering in terms of its manufacturing industry. 1 in 3, Deputy Speaker, 1 in 3 aircraft seats in every aircraft across the world manufactured in Northern Ireland. Every Airbus wing includes components manufactured in the constituency of the Honourable Member for East Belfast. We have a world-class creative industry. And if you look at our film sector in Northern Ireland, the number of new films that are being produced in Northern Ireland, we have a talented workforce. And yes, 40% lower costs when it comes to establishing your business in Northern Ireland. We have access, unfettered access to the UK internal market, and we have privileged access to the EU single market. So I believe that there is a bright future for Northern Ireland, one that can see our economy grow. And as it grows, support for the Union will grow, because who wants to disrupt what is successful? Who wants to move away from what makes Northern Ireland work for all its people? In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I stand here today with optimism for Northern Ireland, the place that I call home, the place I am proud to come from. Its people have so much potential, and we have an opportunity now to demonstrate that potential for all of our people.
On that point, just before you finish, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way? And one of the great things to reinforce what the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, has just said is in the constituency of North Down, my neighbour, ours in North Down Council cover the area. 160 new start-ups for business just in the last year, an indication of how good our people are given the opportunity.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Member for Strangford makes a powerful point, and I want to see that prosperity spread across all of Northern Ireland, to the constituency of the Honourable Member for Foyle, to West Tyrone, to Mid-Ulster, to Fermanagh, South Tyrone, to Newry and Armagh, to South Down, so that Northern Ireland works for everyone. But the other significant thing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that 2023 was the first year in my lifetime when no one was recorded as having been murdered in a Troubles-related crime. Because progress isn't just measured in jobs. It's measured in lives. in the lives of our young people that do not today run the risk of being murdered because of their political aspiration or their political perspective. That is also a mark of the progress we have made. But we do not take our peace for granted. Cementing the peace also means building prosperity, because a Northern Ireland that works for everyone is a Northern Ireland that will succeed and prosper. As a confident unionist, I am very much at home working on matters of mutual concern with our friends and neighbours across the United Kingdom. I am also willing to continue cooperating with our neighbours on the island that we share, our neighbours in the Republic of Ireland. But I simply ask of them that they too respect the settled will of the people of Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom, and that our cooperation is about working together so that we can both benefit from the prosperity that I believe can come. As a unionist by conviction, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to see Northern Ireland playing its full part in the economic life and the economic success of this United Kingdom. I believe in this United Kingdom, and I believe Northern Ireland has a bright place and a bright future within the Union. Thank you.
So let's listen from the member for North Down, Stephen Farry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I apologise, my voice is a bit croaky, so I might have to give up slightly shorter than we'll see how it goes. First of all, I do want to stress that a lot of people in Northern Ireland, including my party, have shown enormous patience and pragmatism, especially over the past 2 years when the Assembly has been down. I do recognise the efforts that have been made by the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley to get his party back into institutions. But against that, we have to recognise that enormous damage was done during the 2-year suspension, as it was whenever Sinn Féin took the institutions down previously to that point. And we have a lot of work to do to undo the damage that has been done, as well as building for the future. And hopefully we can find some consensus tonight on the importance of Northern Ireland having that prosperous future. Now, I don't want to linger on this point, but Brexit is the original sin in terms of the problems that Northern Ireland has had over the past 7 or 8 years. And we've had almost a common theme in terms of trying to find various mechanisms by which we can address the particular challenges posed to Northern Ireland and put in place special arrangements. I hope the Windsor Framework, albeit with these modifications in terms of some of the implementation, can provide that degree of stability. But I think there is a wider point to be made in terms of the future, which is the closer that the UK and the European Union are aligned to each other, then the less the impact of difference down the Irish Sea is going to be, whether we're talking about any residual checks that take place, and also in terms of any tensions that may arise in terms of standards and regulation. So while I hope we are perhaps closing this particular phase of the Brexit wars, particularly as applied to Northern Ireland, there is still a chapter out there that has to be addressed in terms of how the UK and the European Union as a whole can find a better working relationship over the forthcoming years. And I say that while maintaining my own and my party's aspiration that one day we will return to the European Union, and perhaps even before that, the single market and the customs union. In terms of our approach to what has happened, we have given the DUP and the government a considerable amount of space and recognised that there were particular issues that they had to work through in terms of getting to this point. But we equally have to recognise we have had, nonetheless, a one-sided political negotiation in Northern Ireland, which is at odds with the practice over the past 25 years and since the agreement, and indeed before that. Now, we were pragmatic in that particular regard, provided we saw a situation that wasn't going to do any damage to the Good Friday Agreement, wasn't going to do any damage to Northern Ireland's dual market access to both the UK market and the wider EU market, and indeed that the parties were kept informed. On all three of those tests, there are some issues I think we do need to air arising out from the command paper. We have been careful not to destabilise the restoration of the Good Friday institutions earlier on this month, but perhaps tonight is a better opportunity to maybe articulate some of those points rather than rocking the boat at an earlier stage. In many respects, the command paper itself has no legal effect, and we're careful not to get too wound up about it. And for some, it could be characterised as a glorified press release. But there are measures within it that may all cause us concern, and implementation of those is going to be critical. And there are aspects of the language that is one-sided and loaded, which does perhaps point to a wider mindset that again poses some particular concerns. So let me give a few examples in this regard. Like the Shadow Secretary of State, I am concerned about the marginalisation of the duty to promote the or to have due regard to the all-island economy in legislation. Of course, removing those words from law doesn't in itself erase the reality of an all-island economy, but there is a danger of a change of mindset leading to missed opportunities. And I would be very wary of a situation where we have a false setting against each other of the UK economy versus the all-island economy. The two can operate in perfect harmony and complement each other. Now, of course, the all-island economy is different from the UK economy. We're talking in the case of the all-island economy about separate jurisdictions. Obviously, there's issues around tax, there's issues in terms of regulation and governance, just to give a few examples which make them different. However, Northern Ireland is in a situation where sales and supply chains operate on both an east-west and a north-south basis. And the all-island economy exists as a concept above and beyond Northern Ireland's access to the EU single market. And indeed, some clear examples of that are, first of all, the existence of Intertrade Ireland, which the command paper is mirroring with the creation of Intertrade UK. We have the single electricity market on the island, which has been one of the great success stories of North-South cooperation, something that wasn't even envisaged in the Good Friday Agreement, but actually happened afterwards through sheer recognition of reality and indeed pragmatism, including from what were DUP economy ministers at that particular moment in time. We also have the reality in particular around agri-food movements, where we have some very highly intricate arrangements on the island in that particular regard. If we end up in a situation where we're not giving due regard to the all-island economy, we may end up missing opportunities to really drive Northern Ireland's prosperity, because we have to be open to all economic opportunities that come our way, irrespective of the particular characteristic. And that is a particular danger, which I want to come to in a moment, in relation to the Stormont break. I recognise that European Union law is an issue of contention for many people in this House. For me, it is not remotely threatening whatsoever. It's something I want to actively embrace, because it is the key to Northern Ireland's access to the EU single market. So we shouldn't be running away from it. And it is there to provide safeguards in terms of labour rights, consumer protection, environmental protection, and other related areas. Companies want to have certainty in relation to those issues in terms of the environment in which they are operating. And companies, particularly those who are exporting, want to have the ability to operate to the standards of their largest export markets in any event. So this is not something that the business community are raising concerns around. Now, I would have, while I appreciate that in the long run the Stormont break may not actually change that much in terms of Northern Ireland's adherence to EU law, if, however, we find a situation where there's either delay or some other form of uncertainty as to the applicability of updated EU law in Northern Ireland, that may create an issue for some inward investors into Northern Ireland who, in particular, rely upon certainty in terms of regulations, particularly whenever we come to highly regulated areas, for example, pharmaceuticals. So if we want to fully capitalise upon our dual market access, we need to be very, very careful that we don't hollow that out from within through playing political games around the dormant break. And we will reserve judgment to see how this works in practice, but it is something that on paper does cause us at this stage some considerable concerns. Going forward, it's important that we see a change of gear from the government in terms of which they engage with all the political parties in Northern Ireland, as well as trying to address some of the friction that's built up with the Irish government in recent months as well. I appreciate there's two sides to every argument, but nonetheless, those issues do need to be overcome if we are, again, to make the most of this new beginning for Northern Ireland. And I think that greater level of transparency with all the political parties and cooperation with them is going to be crucial in terms of future implementation of any measures that arise out of the command paper. And indeed, in that regard, not every item mentioned in the command paper directly relates to the 7 tests that the DEP set out in terms of their particular reasons for not being part of the executive. So we have seen some mission creep in terms of some of the commitments that have been made, which touch upon a broad spectrum of issues in Northern Ireland, with which there has not been proper engagement with all the political parties. And the government is under that duty to ensure that there is proper fairness in that regard. In terms of some of the constitutional stuff that has been mentioned, I mean, I too am happy to put on record that I don't believe joint authority is part of the Good Friday Agreement. It is a choice between Northern Ireland being part of a single UK or part of a single United Ireland. And within those structures, you can come up with different arrangements, including a federal Ireland or devolution within the context of the UK. But those are the two choices available. That doesn't mean, of course, that the Irish government are a partner in the peace process, and indeed need to be an active participant in some aspects of discussions in relation to Northern Ireland. There's also issues in relation to the East-West Council, how that's going to be reconciled with the British-Irish Council, which is an institution under the Good Friday Agreement, whereas the East-West Council isn't. So how is that going to be reconciled? And again, I think the government need to clarify some of those particular points. Again, the point has been made that if people want to secure the union, and that may well be the intention of a majority of people in Northern Ireland at present, the best way of doing that is through ensuring that Northern Ireland works. And that does mean having functioning and effective political institutions, and it also means equality within Northern Ireland and respect for all traditions. And at the moment the jury is out in that particular regard. Brexit has seen over the past 6-7 years a major reassessment of people's identities and potential aspirations. And I think while opinion polls are pointing in a clear direction at present, I think people would be overly complacent in not reading beneath the surface that there is a degree of concern in terms of how things have happened in recent times, and a reaction to that.
The Honourable Member, allow me?
Yeah, sure.
Very grateful to the Honourable Member, Mr Deputy Speaker, for allowing me. I mean, he has spoken now for over 10 minutes, and he has raised concern after concern after concern after concern about the content of this Safeguarding the Union document. But not once has he reflected on the concerns of Unionists, on the encroachment of our place within this United Kingdom as a result of what he was asking to be rigorously implemented. Rigorously implemented. At some stage, I'm hoping there will be space for it in this debate, could he recognise that the wrong choice over the last number of years was to dismiss and demean the concerns raised by your neighbours? And if he had done that, Mr Deputy Speaker, and his colleagues had done that, then perhaps there may have been a more rational, a more sensible and a more pragmatic recognition, one, of the problems, and two, a collective desire to address them. The only reason that the product of what we're debating this evening was not agreed collectively was because for too many years he and his colleagues dismissed those of us who raised legitimate concerns.
I'm very grateful to the member for intervention, because it allowed me to have a good drink to ease my throat, amongst many things. But also, he raises some interesting questions, which allows me to maybe clarify those points. I wasn't going to rake over old coals too much this evening, but he invites me to do so. Let me be very clear. My party has always taken a pragmatic approach to special arrangements within Northern Ireland. We recognise that whenever Brexit was imposed upon a society that only works through sharing and interdependence, that situation was going to have to be very carefully managed. I didn't want to see any checks introduced anywhere within these islands as a consequence of that, but that was always going to be a reality in the context of a hard Brexit, and hopefully over time the current hard Brexit can be softened, which will help in that particular respect. Insofar as those checks can be minimised, I'm all for that, and our party has never stood in the way of that particular outcome. He makes reference to the phrase rigorous implementation, and this evening we've now heard the term vigorous implementation of the command paper from the honourable member for Strangford. That phrase relates to a letter that was signed by 4 parties in the context in September 2021 in the context of attempts by the UK government to unilaterally breach international law.
Do you regret it?
Our position all along has been that modifications in terms of the protocol and right through to what we have today in terms of the Windsor Framework were appropriate, that those needed to be negotiated between the UK government and the European Union as the signatories to the new arrangements, and they had to be legal. So in that context, our position has always been consistent. We are party of law. We are committed to implementing the law where we're required to implement the law, but where the law can be changed through proper process, we're all for that. But we were always against, and we remain against, to unilateral action which puts Northern Ireland in a worse position because it undermines trust. And the big game changer was whenever we had a change of government in the autumn of 2022, and all of a sudden, because the European Union and UK government started talking to one another, things started moving really quickly. And I would say, actually, the arrangement that we have today could have been found much earlier if we had a lot more trust in terms of the process between the European Union and the UK government. And they certainly didn't justify or require the Assembly to be down for 2 years, causing chaos in Northern Ireland's public services and a huge number of missed opportunities. My party has always been very clear that we wanted to see things such as the red and green lane be introduced, which was achieved through the Windsor Framework. And indeed, we have proposed consistently things like a veterinary agreement, which I will remind the honourable member for East Belfast that his party initially opposed whenever we put it forward. Those questions that were asked in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and DUP ministers said they were opposed, including the former leader of the DUP. And I'm happy to give way to the member again. So have no drink.
Very grateful to him, and he can have another sup at that cup. I'm not sure it's working. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, what we did oppose was the understanding that all veterinary medicines would be available in Northern Ireland through an EU prism, through an EU regime. What we have proposed, and what continues to be a part of this command paper with the government's indication that they will publish come springtime, unilateral action should agreement not be reached, is a recognition of mutual standards, mutual recognition. And the honourable member should recognise that when we consider what this House and the other place passed 3 weeks ago in statutory instruments, goods guarantee and mutual recognition, 2 things that I believe he and his colleagues may have described as unicorns.
Well, first of all, I think there's the danger that the member was conflating a veterinary agreement with the issue of veterinary medicines at the start of his comments. There is an issue in terms of veterinary medicines which does need to be properly addressed, but the issue of a wider veterinary agreement was something that the DUP did oppose. And this is a wider SPS agreement between the UK and the European Union, which would free up bureaucracy in terms of the movement of agri-food products. This is something that obviously would have a very direct benefit in terms of the REC, but it is fundamentally in the interest of the whole UK agri-food sector in terms of addressing some of the bureaucracy, which is increasingly coming to the fore and causing frustration for many businesses. And indeed, perhaps at some point we're going to have a discussion around the not for EU labelling issue, which again is causing major concerns for businesses across the UK, but again something's been driven by this very particular process. I appreciate that the member and his party are keen to have this narrative about we have achieved this, we have achieved that, and look, I'm not trying to burst their bubble too much, but there is a reality that there will still be a degree of checks across the REC. Now, whether they're done on a risk basis or whether we have a red channel for that, the reality is that there is going to have to be some management of that REC interface, including the registration of businesses, to do that. Those are all products of the fact that we have a hard Brexit and we have to manage those tensions. I'm delighted that we have got them down as far as we have, but equally we need to be frank and honest that there's certain parameters beyond which people can't go. In closing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wasn't necessarily planning to have as big a row with the DUP tonight as unfolded, but I want to just make some comments to the government in terms of the way forward. We're getting a very clear narrative from the government that they have a commitment to making Northern Ireland work, and we all share that, and they want to see prosperity. I want to make 3 points, which hopefully the DUP will agree with some of what I'm saying. The first thing is, in terms of the financial package, it was very clear that revenue raising was meant to be part of the wider transformation plan that was required from the executive in terms of paying off what was being packaged as being the debt of the executive. Though, of course, if we had a proper fiscal floor, that debt would not have arisen in the first place. I freely acknowledge that the executive will have to address revenue raising. However, there is a danger that we end up with a rush to address revenue raising in the coming months while the executive is still trying to find its feet and address wider financial issues which could cause difficulties within that executive. Of course, we should address it. However, let's not headlong rush into it. A figure of £113 million is not insignificant. However, it is a drop in the ocean compared to a 14 billion plus revenue budget. And there are much bigger decisions in terms of how the executive addresses health reform, reform of education, that the executive needs to be encouraged to do, rather than ending up in a clash over £113 million. The second issue is in relation to Casement Park. This is an important issue, first of all, for the Euros in 2028, but it's also a wider totemic issue for a section of the community in Northern Ireland. And I'm not going into exactly what the UK government has to do in this regard, but the government is a player in this respect, and commitments have been made in terms of UK government support for this overall project. The clock is clearly ticking on this. There's a degree of urgency, and this issue is now being escalated as a potential political confrontation point, which again may pose problems to the restored executive. And so I would therefore ask that the government, with all the caveats in terms of value for money that the government have to consider, that they make clear as soon as possible what they can do in relation to this project so that it can move ahead. And the third area relates to the Fresh Start money that is being repackaged and being made available to the executive. This is above and beyond the 3.3 billion package for the restored executive. But that fund was already part of a transformation fund for shared and, in particular, integrated education. And we've now a situation where 10 schools at different levels of development for integrated education, which is something that the government have embraced, to be fair to them, over many years, are now placed in jeopardy. And that, to me, is a stepping back, not just from integration in Northern Ireland and what those schools can do for reconciliation, but it's also at odds with the objective of transformation. So I would urge that the government reconsider with the executive how they're handling that £150 million of funding that has been repurposed away from Fresh Start, which again was a package agreed by the government in a previous political crisis in Northern Ireland. So in closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I probably have spoken far longer than I anticipated, but to say that, look, I do recognise that Northern Ireland is in a much better place with a restored executive and assembly, and I mean I do recognise that a lot of good work has been done to address a number of critical issues, but there are still bumps on the road ahead, and my central appeal would be that the government works more closely with the parties, all of the political parties, to ensure that the implementation of what they have set out is done in a fair and transparent way, and that all concerns and input is fully taken into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I just say, before I look at the humble address, that I think that many people in North Down, a Unionist constituency, will be just wondering what kind of a representative they have. He probably was a good proxy for a Sinn Féin representative here this evening in his disregard for the concerns of Unionists about the protocol, in his acceptance and his unwillingness to even apologise for the fact that he and his party wanted the government to double down on the protocol, despite the damage it was causing. And the only plea he could make for additional finance here tonight, a plea which, by the way, his party, during the negotiations, said that they had negotiated a wonderful package. And of course, there is still underfunding as a result of the way the funding formula is applied to Northern Ireland. But the only plea that the member for North Down could make was for Casement Park and for additional money to pay for a stadium, which the GAA have said they will not give 1 penny more to. They expect the UK government to divvy up for their state-of-the-art stadium. But I want to just look at the terms of the humble address this evening. And it's significant. This is an address from this Parliament to His Majesty, telling His Majesty the commitments which this Parliament is making in respect of a number of issues. It's also significant that this humble address is essential because, and was only being brought forward because of the way in which successive Prime Ministers from the Conservative and Unionist Party have betrayed Northern Ireland, choosing rather to side with the EU and not annoy the European Union, even if it meant weakening the Union of the United Kingdom. And that's the sad reality. These assuring words, or as the member for Foyle described, the love letter to Unionists. So I think when we look at it, we'll see it's not such a love letter anyway. But the love letter to Unionists is essential because of the trust which has been broken by a government that was quite happy to hand Northern Ireland over to the European Union as a vassal state, to use the terms of the former Prime Minister, who actually was responsible for some of the damage which was done. There are a number of issues that are addressed here. The first one is to affirm the importance of upholding the Belfast Good Friday Agreement with all its strands. Why is it necessary to do that? The reason why, of course, it's necessary to do that is because this government, at the behest of the European Union, because it wanted and it required that the position of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom be weakened, and that any attempt to redress that would be thwarted by changing the voting arrangements in the Assembly. That's the reason why we have to have this affirming the importance of the Belfast Agreement. Now, we already know that, of course, it wasn't all that important to this government, because the whole principle of consent in changing the position of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom was simply ignored. And the damage is done. And there's been no attempt, as I'll point out later on, to undo that damage. The Belfast Agreement made it clear that any change in the position of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom could only be done with the consent of the people of Northern Ireland. That change took place when the UK government agreed that the EU would have the ability in 300 areas of law to make laws for Northern Ireland, that Northern Ireland representatives would have no say in the making of those laws. In fact, the only country which would, on the island of Ireland that would have a say is the Republic of Ireland, because it's membership of the EU. So the EU and Irish Republic would have the ability to make laws in relation to Northern Ireland over 300 areas of law, and there would be no ability for Northern Ireland politicians elected to the Assembly. And I must say, the member for North Down might be quite happy that his party members are elected to an Assembly and there's a whole raft of areas of law that they don't have any say on. But, well, yes.
Very grateful to the member giving way. We are relaxed about European Union law, but the thing we were certainly not relaxed about was not having an assembly whatsoever for the past 2 years. So anyone who wants to talk about democratic deficits needs to refocus themselves away from the technicalities of EU law to the fact that no one was in charge of health, education, the economy for the past 2 years, and the damage that has been done. And I would hope that the member would show some degree of humility and recognise his role, and indeed his party's role, in the chaos that has been forced upon Northern Ireland over the past 2 years, where they have taken their time negotiating this new arrangement with the government.
And isn't this the amazing stance of the member for North Down? He talks about the democratic deficit which existed for 2 years while the Assembly was not operating. But he is quite happy to have a democratic deficit which will last for decades as a result of the arrangement which is in place now. So, I mean, he can't get concerned about the inability for politicians in Northern Ireland to do something. And the reason, of course, why we had the 2 years of Stormont not operating was because the principle on which Stormont was bound to operate, i.e. that there had to be consent and you had to take into consideration the views of nationalists and unionists, had been simply wiped aside. So it couldn't have worked anyway, because, of course, the very foundation of the Belfast Agreement had been removed. So, in the past, and when we see this affirmation of the Belfast Agreement, I have to ask the Minister, how is it that the government can affirm the Belfast Agreement when we have in place arrangements today that only came about because one of the central principles of the agreement had been removed? And of course, it's not just looking at the past, it's looking at the future, because there will be, and the Assembly will have a decision to make, and will have a vote at the end of this year on the arrangements which are in place. That vote will be a very controversial vote, because, of course, it looks forward and looks backward. First of all, were the arrangements put in place acceptable? But far more importantly, will the arrangements going forward be acceptable? And the vote will not just simply be about EU law, because the EU laws in 4 years' time, nobody who's taking part in this vote will even know about. This vote will be about our is the Assembly going to continue having the Republic of Ireland and the EU making laws which are unknown, which we'll have no say in formulating in the future? So there can be no more controversial vote than that. And yet the Belfast Agreement says that a vote like that, of that nature, should not be made on a majority basis. In fact, since 1972, votes and issues which were controversial could not be made on a majority basis in Northern Ireland. Yet here is one of the most controversial votes which the Northern Ireland Assembly will be involved in. And because the government, at the behest or demand of the Irish Republic and the EU, set aside the requirement for cross-community support in that vote. So we find that, on one hand, the Minister today is proposing a motion which affirms the importance of upholding the Belfast Agreement, knowing full well he has agreed to and defended and will continue to put in place arrangements which undermine the very principle of consent for a most controversial issue which will take place at the end of this year. So, when we address His Majesty and say that we're affirming the Belfast Agreement, I think that we've got to look at the way we've dispensed with its central provision in the past and the way we're going to remove the ability to use the consent principle in the future on one of the most controversial issues. The second thing is that it acknowledges the foundational importance of the Acts of Union. Now, I find that rather strange. It's not just we acknowledge the Act of Union and the Acts of Union, but the foundational importance of the Acts of Union. This is the Acts of Union which, in the court case that was taken against the Northern Ireland Protocol, the government's lawyers said when this House voted for the withdrawal agreement, we had impliedly disapplied the Article 6 of the Act of Union, and which the courts ruled the Article 6, which contains the foundational economic rights, had been suspended. And they have not been unsuspended. They're still suspended. And why were they suspended? They were suspended because, as a result of giving the EU the say to make laws in respect of Northern Ireland, there had to be some impediments to trade between GB and Northern Ireland. And I know that the shadow spokesman talked about how even under the Act of Union there were impediments to trade, and he's right. There's one fundamental difference, however. These were impediments which were put in place and were decided upon by administrations within the United Kingdom because they saw that it created an advantage. The difference now is that the Act of Union and its foundational economic rights have been suspended because the EU demands that that is the case. Because now, since Northern Ireland is part of the single market, the EU requires that there be certain restrictions placed, certain checks put in place. And here's a further irony, that those restrictions which are in place, even with the new arrangements, are far more intrusive and far more difficult hurdles to overcome when it comes to trade between GB and Northern Ireland than it would be for trade between France and GB or Germany and GB. So and that is what has put so many people off trading with Northern Ireland. And I know that the government is now going to go around them all and say, look, you should come back to the Northern Ireland market. And the shadow spokesman talked about the way in which trade had been diverted. That's a conscious decision that firms have made because of the difficulties in bringing goods into Northern Ireland from GB. I will give it, yeah.
Very grateful to the honourable member for giving way, but on the issues about which he complains, it pains me to say it, but the reason that they were put in place was because of a vote in this Parliament when the Withdrawal Act was passed by the House of Commons. So it isn't actually correct to say that they are enforced upon Northern Ireland by the EU of its own volition. There were arrangements that the House decided should be put in place because the people of the United Kingdom had voted to leave the European Union, and that too is a fact.
Well, I think that it was a vote which was made in this House on two grounds. First of all, because the EU had made it quite clear, and we had a spineless government that was prepared to bow to them, that if these arrangements are not put in place, then there will be no deal. And the government weighing up the impact that it might have on the rest of the United Kingdom and the impact it would have in Northern Ireland, decided that Northern Ireland would be the sacrificial lamb. And secondly, of course, we were promised at the time, indeed this House was promised, and businesses in Northern Ireland were promised, don't worry, you'll get some bits of paper which just tear up, or give the Prime Minister a ring and he'll make sure you don't have to worry about. So, the decision was made, I accept, by this House. The decision was made on that basis. And it still doesn't undermine the fact that when the decision was made, then it had a detrimental impact on Northern Ireland. Now, the Windsor Framework and the Northern Ireland Protocol, we've had changes in the Safeguarding the Union document, but the fact remains that the foundational importance, the economic foundational importance of the Acts of Union are still being undermined. We still have goods which have to go through a red lane. 20%, we're told. Most of them go to manufacturing businesses or distributors in Northern Ireland. In many cases, simply because they're parts of products which will eventually be sold, because the product has not been made, it's only parts coming in, and the eventual destination of those products, even though in most cases businesses can say, look, we sell in Northern Ireland, we sell outside the EU, or we sell to GB, they will still be subject to those checks. I spoke with a businessman this morning who informed me that the last order he got, and he says it's going to get worse, the last order he got, goods coming through the red lane, the paperwork for that took 6 hours. And he said, you know, when you're working on very thin margins, that additional work makes you then ask, do you want to invest further in Northern Ireland, or do you simply jump over the border and go into the Irish Republic? So there's a huge economic impact of the red lane requirement. And of course, even the UK internal market requirement, it's only at the gift of the EU, because the EU still has control of trade which comes from GB into Northern Ireland through its regulations, 1231 and 1128. And while if the EU deems at any stage that the arrangements being placed as far as the internal market lane is concerned do not meet their requirements, the ultimate say as to what happens to those movements of trade will remain with the EU, and they can go back to the default position with 100% checks. So the foundational importance of the Acts of Union, as long as the Article 6 is suspended, as long as the arrangements, and I note that as a result of the Safeguarding the Union, we have not had any removal of those two regulations by the EU, the EU still holds that control. And that is a worrying thing for businesses in Northern Ireland. And again, if the humble address is all about telling His Majesty that the foundational importance of the Acts of Union will be respected and are being respected by this government, it's just not true. The last point that I want to make is that executive power shall continue to be vested in Her Majesty's and that joint authority is not provided for in the Belfast Agreement. Well, I think that, first of all, in the past, there's no definition, first of all, of what joint authority is here. And don't forget, in the past, we have had ministers from that dispatch box standing and telling us that there was no change in the constitutional position of Northern Ireland as a result of the protocol and as a result of the Windsor Framework, and that Northern Ireland was still fully part of the United Kingdom. Words can mean whatever they want, it seems, when the government finds itself challenged by the agreement which it has made with the EU. I trust that the government will not accede to some of the demands that have been made, especially, the member for North Down in his intervention earlier on wanted a review of the Belfast Agreement. A review of the Belfast Agreement, of course, would open all kinds of doors there, and if he had his way, the review would be based on a majority view of what should happen in the future. And the removal of the consent principle and the majority vote in the Assembly, I'll give way, yes, in the Assembly, of course, is what he and his friends in Sinn Féin and the SDLP are aiming for now. Now that unions are minority, majoritarianism no longer is a problem.
I thank thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for giving way. I've listened with great interest to many of the points made, and I'm particularly taken by the attention he's given to the foundational importance of constitutional matters in this, and I know that's a matter that exercises many of us on this side of the chamber. Does he agree with me that it seems incongruous that changes to constitutional law, not even primary legislation, but constitutional law, were made in this chamber through the use of statutory instruments, and that we actually had to seek to extend, to secure 180 minutes of debate on those? Does he not agree, and again I know as many on this side of the House agree, that matters of constitutional law should be treated with proper respect and subject to proper debate and scrutiny of this House before they are changed?
And the member makes a very important point, because of course the Act of Union was changed without it even being mentioned by ministers, that was happening when we agreed to the withdrawal agreement and the withdrawal legislation. It was later on they used that defence in court. Secondly, of course, when it came to the changes which we discussed a couple of weeks ago in respect of protecting trade between Northern Ireland and GB, and also in protecting Northern Ireland, a further wedge being driven between Northern Ireland and GB as a result of changes in law in this place, we got 90 minutes to discuss them, and not a great deal of time to scrutinise them, and indeed not, because at the end the Minister had about 3 minutes to sum up, not even an answer to many of the questions that had been asked. Mr. Deputy. Yes, well, yeah.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's just to make the point, because you will have heard me, I hope, say that's not right. It's not the case that the government made the argument after the fact that Article 6 had been impliedly repealed or subsequently found by the court to be temporarily suspended. I raised the question in the House of the Minister before it passed, and they hadn't a clue what was being asked of them. So the notion that this Parliament chose to proceed along a path which was encroaching on Article 6 is not right, because it was asked and it was answered negatively by ministers at the time. We scrutinised, we raised the constitutional importance of the actions they were taking, and it was the government
that denied that was the case.
I thank the member for clarification, and it does show that in all of these discussions, he especially has used his knowledge of these issues. But again, if we've got a government that is prepared to, either because it didn't know or because it didn't want others to know, and so it simply ignored the points which he had made, then that makes it even more disgraceful. And it's one of the reasons why, when we have a humble address like this, it is right that we scrutinise and we ask questions and we raise the issues about what exactly is meant by the promises which are made to His Majesty and to the people of Northern Ireland. And sadly, I've got to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't believe that what has been said in this, or what promises have been made already, address the issues. Really, if we're going to address the issue of keeping Northern Ireland firmly within the United Kingdom, then the Windsor Framework has to go. The principle of consent has to be restored. And the people of Northern Ireland and elected representatives in Northern Ireland must have the ability to make the laws that they're elected to make.
Order. As members know, we had two significant statements earlier after departmental questions, and it is likely that this debate will go perhaps another hour. We had significant numbers of people in for the debate that was to follow, a general debate on farming, which will now be rescheduled, and members will be told in the usual manner when that debate will take place. Ian Paisley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The member for North Down says a glorified press release is in front of us tonight. The member for Foyle, no longer in his place, says that a love letter to the Democratic Unionist Party has been penned. Yet if that's all it is, they still protest that Unionists get as much as a nod and a wink. They still object to it. It still shouldn't have been done. Unionists should get nothing out of this place. That's the import of what's been said by those comments. Or else, perhaps, the import of those comments is the members for North Down and for Foyle doth protest too much. Perhaps that is the real issue, that they don't like anything that has been done that gives unionism a nod or a wink or an advantage or a recognition of their right, a recognition of our rights. Perhaps that is the strongest of all objections. There's been some points made this evening about the future of Casement Park. And I wasn't going to mention Casement Park, but given that it's been put on the agenda, I think I will take the opportunity, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think most people listened in consternation this morning to the words of Jarlath Burns, the leader of the GAA, when he made those comments. Not a penny more will come from the GAA for Casement Park. Not even an inflation-related point. Not a penny more will come. It's 15 million or nothing from the GAA. And I do wonder, because that is a blow, that has to be a significant body blow to the future of Casement Park. Because I do wonder, whenever the Northern Ireland Executive indicate they will give an inflation-related piece of money, significant piece of money to that project, whenever the government from Dublin has indicated they will give multiples of millions to that project, and yet not even an inflation-linked amount will be given by the GAA. It does suggest to me that perhaps the GAA actually don't want Casement Park to go ahead, and they are actually looking for someone or for some group to blame. And I hear the giggles and fits from the SNP, but of course it's very easy to spend other people's money. This project now looks as if it's going to be short by about £100 million. And I've heard comments tonight that, you know, we should really be able to wipe out the not insignificant, I think was the comment, the not insignificant £113 million that has been asked for with regards to executive funding. But yet, the big ask is, we better have this money, no matter what it is, made available for Casement Park. I think that's absolutely amazing. because it shows that not only have we got a demand for this money, it's almost put up there as a point that, and if you don't give us that money, then there's going to be a crisis. And that seems to be the way in which that comment was framed this evening to the House. And I think most people will reflect very solemnly in the comments that were made by Jarlath Burns and by other people in this House and outside who have made it clear that the money must be made available or else. Well, that's not the way things can work any longer. There's got to be difficult decisions made. And I do suspect that the decisions that are going to be made very soon about the future of Casement Park will be incredibly difficult. And it's how other parties respond to those difficult decisions will be the measure of those parties in the future. The Minister was taken down a particular rabbit hole by the member for Foyle, who again isn't in his place. Perhaps he's decided to go back to Foyle given the needs of Seagate, the terrible issue there with the loss of 300 jobs. I hope he is working hard to get those jobs back. They're very, very significant. Perhaps Mr Kennedy, the envoy, will turn up with the chequebook and the trillions of pounds that he said are available for Northern Ireland. It would be amazing if he did. And perhaps those jobs will be saved and money from America will ultimately arrive, because those jobs are very, very important for that area. But the Minister was taken down a particular rabbit hole and asked to confirm that under the terms of the Belfast Agreement and the Northern Ireland Act that there would be a simple majority vote for the future of Northern Ireland. Of course, that's not in the Act. It talks about a majority vote. It doesn't define what that majority is, if it's a majority of the people. It's a majority of the people who vote. In fact, the definition has been left open, I believe, purposely, so as that Parliament will have a say in terms of the terms and conditions. And of course, the Minister, referring to previous referenda in this country, has already conceded that a small majority is not the way to make major constitutional change in this nation. And I'm sure if he believes that, he will certainly believe that for the outworkings of the Belfast Agreement. And he shares the same position with the late Seamus Mallon, one of the negotiators of the Belfast Agreement, who made it clear that, in his words, there had to be a clear majority for a change to the constitutional position of Northern Ireland. So I think we should avoid going down some of those rabbit holes in an avoidance to recognise the importance of what this House is debating tonight and the fact that we should be debating it. Now, the objective of every unionist is to undo the damage done by the great betrayal that the former Prime Minister's government conceded when they conceded the protocol on Northern Ireland. And it was against the advice of unionists then. Unionists on these benches, myself included, met with the then Prime Minister and implored him not to go down the road of a protocol. And of course he said it would all be sorted out. He came to County Antrim and he told farmers in County Antrim that, oh, don't worry, all this could be shredded. We could ignore it. We can throw bits of paper in the bin. Of course, as it transpired, the Prime Minister's betrayal of Northern Ireland has left us that we're still debating this issue 2 years onwards. And the damage that has been done, the untold damage to the Union in terms of its psychological view of where it is as a people, and to our economic position of the Kingdom, lies foursquare at their feet. And it's important that they undo that damage. And I agree with the leader of our party that after much diligence, we have a work in progress. Yes, much more does have to be done. Today's humble address, therefore, has to be seen in the context of more being done. And the fact of the matter is, we then have, whenever there's a hint being given that we want to see more progress, more stability, you can't even have that. That seems to be the cry from nationalism. I think nationalism has to grow up in this and recognise that it can't go on baiting and pushing at unionism because it's wrong. Until the laws promised by this strengthening the union are actually operational in Northern Ireland, in many respects there will remain problems for Northern Ireland's trade. And that's why I want to urge the government today to hurry up, to get on with and implement the changes that they have said are coming. Otherwise, more divergence will be threatened, and we've got to avoid divergence. It remains a threat and an ever-present danger to the Union, and that's why the sooner the government legislates and moves on these issues, the better. Unionists, however, know that we have a history that we have to always remain vigilant. As this is a work in progress, and as the government, in previous utterances from that dispatch box, has conceded that more acts are to follow, it would be very worthwhile for them this evening to once again state from the dispatch box that actual case. They cannot expect one party in Northern Ireland to do all the heavy lifting in this regard. Would the government therefore spell out when these further actions are going to be calendared? When are we going to see the further actions? In conversations with my own party colleagues and with my own party leader, we have already discussed the necessity for implementation of what is promised and the need to make more progress. But it's okay us talking about it. The government has to action these things. We will have constituents, we already have constituents, feeling the vice-like pinch of the protocol and the framework on their businesses, already outlined by my colleague from East Antrim. And I intend to put some on record, some examples on record myself, which really perplex me and which should have been resolved by the government. These examples undermine the ongoing damage to our UK single market trade, our largest market by far. I and my party leader have both been in contact with senior civil servants in Northern Ireland, challenging them why frictions continue when this place has spelt out that those frictions ought to have been removed. Northern Ireland businesses are quite right to be impatient, and rightly so, when we demand progress now. We can't live on the promise that change is coming or on the promise of jam tomorrow. This House and we demand actions now. We urge the government not to lose the momentum for change, and so can I ask the following. When, for example, is the Veterinary Medicines Working Group going to actually be established and commence work? This is an urgent priority for our single largest sector. Secondly, when is the Plant Working Group going to be established? Another urgent matter which was raised by the member on the opposite benches. When is the Intertrade Body going to be established? What date is penciled in and calendared for that important body to start its operational procedures? What instructions have been given to DAERA in Northern Ireland to progress the changes for goods flowing from GB to Northern Ireland? The reason why I ask that is because I have several examples where companies in my own constituency and across Northern Ireland are being held back because of these frictions. I, for example, had a constituent in my office this week who said that orders for plants from an English wholesaler, that a very, very small business, but that she too has been told, go elsewhere, try somewhere else, don't buy from the United Kingdom. Now, I have volunteered to my constituent that as her MP, I am quite happy to bring those stocks, those samplings and those seeds over in my hand luggage if she so requires. And I tell you this, dear help the official who tries to stop me.
Of course I do. Thank the member for getting away. Just on that issue that he's talked about bringing the material over himself, can he understand the incredulity that there would be amongst consumers in Northern Ireland as they would say, what possible risk is there to the EU internal market in doing what he has suggested?
The point is made well, because there is zero risk to the European single market. Just like with the veterinary medicines, and the Secretary of State will know this well because I've discussed it with him, there is zero risk because it's the same medicine. Europe doesn't want the medicines changed. Shock horror. Europe just wants a label changed. But in order for that label to be changed, they're demanding of the pharmaceutical companies a whole rescaling and re-examination of what's in every product, which costs millions of pounds and quite frankly would not be worth it for the companies. It's the same with biscuits. The leader of my party today met with a company which is being demanded to do certain labelling. They're not trying to change the content of what is in the biscuits or the recipe, but they're trying to change the label, because the single market might be damaged by the wrong label. That's how bent bananas, squared up cucumbers this argument actually is. And we should have left this argument long ago. I have a haulage business in my constituency who has seen his consignments. Many move from 9 cheques per month in August of last year to, wait for it, 27 cheques on his goods in the last 2 weeks in this month. And if we've got 27 cheques already, and we're now moving to the last couple of days of February, he's going to have the record number of cheques in any month since the protocol came into place. Once again, can the government look into this overzealous DAERA department, who appear that they won't undo what this House said has to be undone, and which was outlined in a previous debate in this House? I did put in the agenda earlier my other constituent who is trying to buy scanners for a service sector industry, that he's always bought these scanners from GB, and he's been told now that he must have an EROI number. That is a number that means you pay VAT in the Republic of Ireland. My constituent doesn't trade in the Republic of Ireland. He therefore is being denied buying equipment from GB because some official here is saying, oh no, you must have an EROI number and you must put GB in front of it. It doesn't exist. It's appalling that he's been put into that position. I'm delighted the Minister wants to...
I'm really grateful to him, because I'm listening to him, and I can't wait for my closing speech to say to him, please give us all these examples in full detail in writing, and I will be very pleased indeed to have officials go through them with a fine-tooth comb and see what can be done in absolutely every case. As has been said time and again, work will continue to improve matters. I'm yearning for the full detail so we can work on it.
Well, I like the Minister's enthusiasm. Can I say that I'm ahead of him? That I have already, and the leader of my party has already met with and discussed with officials, and have put these issues to the Cabinet Office, which I understand is the proper channel to push these matters through. So I hope the Cabinet Office include him in it, and he then gets his teeth into these matters and delivers for me and for my party leader and for my colleagues on these issues that perplex us so much. Of course I will.
But last Monday was my first day as a joint Cabinet Office Northern Ireland Office Minister, precisely so that I can assist officials with some ministerial work with them.
Well, Minister, can I congratulate you on your promotion? Can I commiserate with you that you're going to be dealing more and more and more with myself and my colleagues, and we'll test you to the nth degree.
Testing me? Yes, exactly.
My enthusiasm, Madam Deputy Speaker. We'll test the Minister to the nth degree for what he will want. I do want to make a point about whisky, not because they are as late, but because I think it's important to make the point. And I want the government to confirm, because this point has been made about tariffs, and a certain whisky company in my constituency is mentioned, and I think they probably dread being mentioned at every point in this because they just want to get on with the trade. But I want the Minister to confirm that any tariffs, such as were on Bushmills whisky after the Act of 1801, and which the Act of Union imposed, that all of those tariffs were actually removed at a very important historical juncture of this nation, removed in 1879, during, guess what, the great Home Rule debates. And they were removed in order to calm things down. And maybe, just maybe, that lesson from history needs to be learnt. That these borders, these problems that have been put in place, need to be removed to calm things down. If we could learn that lesson from history, not only would that whisky company in my constituency, that is the premier whisky constituency and whisky company in the whole of the British Isles, that company would continue to do exceptionally well. I would also say for the record, there hasn't been a single tariff actually placed, additional tariff placed on whisky throughout the whole period of the protocol either. So there's nothing actually to be removed. The history of that is incredibly interesting. It was in the 1600s when these tariffs were brought in. Those tariffs were brought in on Irish whisky because it was the most successful product being made on the entire island of Ireland. And they then introduced what was called the whisky tax. It became known as the Parliament tax of 1661. And only those companies that paid tax were therefore registered. So the 1,200 whisky distilleries across Ireland suddenly became 40 whisky distilleries. I'm not saying the others ceased to exist. They just did the Irish thing of not paying their tax. And that is a very important distinction. And of course, the reason why the issue of taxation was brought in on whisky, on Irish whisky, was actually to protect the Scottish market. It was a fledgling whisky market. It had developed about 40 or 50 years after the Irish whisky market in the early 1400s. And in order to protect that whisky market, the Parliament here decided that they should engage in something called protectionism of its Scottish market. I'm glad that that was removed and ought to have been removed and allowed the Northern Irish whisky trade to continue to flourish, given that it's a much better product and is spelt correctly. On that point, I will look forward to the Minister's responses to those several questions that I've asked and urge him to deliver in terms of action, not just good words.
Before I bring in the next speaker, just to say I do want to make sure that the Minister has at least 10 minutes to wind up. So I would advise that if the remaining speakers were about 10 minutes each, that would do the trick. Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in approaching the humble address, I hope it is in order by way of introduction to make some comments about safeguarding the Union, but it has been a very wide debate, so I assume that is appropriate at this point. I recognise those within my party who have worked very hard to improve this unacceptable situation that we found ourselves in, and I welcome provisions including, amongst others, the Monitoring Committee, the East-West Council, the new provisions on rest of world products, and the commitment of the UK Government to stand by Northern Ireland in the absence of a resolution on veterinary medicines. The DUP unfortunately have had to take steps, and often criticised for them, to address the far-reaching implications of the protocol. Often we have had the blame for many of the problems that have flowed from this unforgivable move on the part of our government back when the iniquitous protocol was implemented. I welcome the improvements, but as has been said, there remains much work to be done, and I, along with my colleagues along this bench, are all too aware of the work that lies ahead. And I too would take this opportunity to raise, and the Secretary of State will be very aware of, the issues around horse movements from GB to Northern Ireland and vice versa, obviously the issues around rare breeds and plants, etc., all of which have been brought to me in my role as Agri spokesperson. So I look forward to the engagement that has been promised on that and trying to get resolves on those issues. But part of the answer lies in the text of the humble address. Madam Deputy Speaker, the humble address tells us that the economic provisions provided by Article 6 of the Act of Union are of foundational importance. And that's absolutely correct. In the 21st century, being part of the same country means being part of the same internal market, which means that goods can flow freely within it without encountering border control posts, demanding customs and SPS paperwork and checks that increase costs and can make the difference between whether a domestic economic venture is viable or whether it has to fall by the wayside. Having the right to border-free access within the internal market of the country of which you are part is certainly, from the vantage point of today, a basic right of economic citizenship. The really odd thing then about today is that we are gathered here to affirm that not only is Article 6 and the rights that it confers important, they are, in the words of the humble address, of foundational importance, and yet on the 8th of February 2023 the Supreme Court ruled that they are in part suspended, and that's paragraph 68 of the judgment. We cannot withdraw, even temporarily, anything that is foundational without inviting or ensuring the structure that supports it topples. Part of the partial suspension of the economics provisions under Article 6 results in Northern Ireland being cut off from the rest of the UK through a customs border that has to be crossed, whether it is approached through the Red Lane or the internal market system. The alternative border experience for customs that constitutes the UK internal market system is actually defined by the Commission Delegated Regulation EU 2023-1128 that my colleague referred to earlier, whose formal EU description is, and I quote, amending Delegated Regulation EU 2015-2446 to provide for simplified customs formalities for trusted traders and for sending parcels into Northern Ireland from another part of the United Kingdom. The provisions thus simplify customs formalities, but they don't remove them. Rather than removing these movements from the remit of the EU Customs Code, they have the effect of amending how the EU Customs Code deals with them. It's quite extraordinary that the UK government should agree that movements of goods within the United Kingdom be subject to a border imposed by 27 other states who regulate movements from one part of our country to another through their custom code, regardless of how demanding or undemanding
Would the member
that
give way?
code is. I will indeed give way.
Thank the member for giving way and for highlighting the point. Many members of the public who order goods online and are being delivered from a UK company but are making their way into Northern Ireland by being shipped at night into Dublin are ending up having to pay customs to the Republic of Ireland for goods that are to be used within the United Kingdom. This is another area that needs to be seriously looked at, and it's something that is not addressed as yet.
I thank the honourable member. I thank the honourable member for his point, and he makes a very valid point. And all I will say is the Minister in his new role will be extremely busy dealing with the many issues that remain. Some might say, well, if the EU sought to change the customs code to increase the demands on trusted traders, then we could refuse to accept the change, but that actually goes to the heart of the matter. If we would be prepared to refuse such a change from the EU under those circumstances, then why would we accept them under the current circumstances through arrangements that involve the partial disenfranchisement of 1.9 million UK citizens who can no longer stand for election to make all the laws to which they are subject and must make do under the brake with the right to stand for election to try and stop some laws already made for us by a foreign parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, the truth is, as was pointed out in the other place, the Windsor Framework is an invalid treaty. There are rules about what makes a treaty valid or invalid, and one of the most basic is respect for the territorial integrity of states, which involves states renouncing claims to make the laws of other states. The Windsor Framework involves 27 states refusing to recognise the territorial integrity of the UK. They're seeking to divide our country into two and then claiming the right to make some of the laws for part of our country. In this context, the UK government should declare the treaty void and act on the determination set out in this humble address that Article 6 is of foundational importance. Look for the earliest opportunity for Parliament to unsuspend and thus fully restore Article 6 so the people of Northern Ireland are not alienated, however temporarily, from any aspect of this provision that is, as the humble address rightly acknowledges, of foundational importance. Madam Deputy Speaker, many in Northern Ireland have welcomed the restoration of the Northern Ireland Assembly and the ability of it to deal with health, education, infrastructure, and I, for one, will be raising many of these issues with our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Assembly. I trust that we will see much change in those issues that impact on a daily basis. However, we must not paper over the cracks. There remains much work to do, and I think today has been a very sensible debate, and it has been a debate that has allowed many issues to be raised in a constructive way, and we look forward to engaging with the Minister on many of these going forward.
James Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is indeed a pleasure to speak in this debate, and I wish to thank all of those who have made significant contributions. As a Northern Ireland MP, I am delighted to see made clear from this House today the position that Northern Ireland is in. I want to make a quick comment, if I can, about Casement Park, because I don't think I can pass by it and not make a comment, because I did mention to the Secretary of State last week at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee the cost now is some £225 million. I understand the monies that were originally thought would be about 70 or 75 million. So I'm just suggesting that maybe rather than pursue a white elephant where those who should be making bigger contributions aren't, it'd be better to disperse that £70 million, the original £70 million, across the whole of Northern Ireland to ensure that all clubs in whatever sports can get the benefit of that. Now, that's a decision, of course, will be made by the Assembly, not by here, and I understand that. But when it comes to the bigger picture, I think we have to look at that as well. David Jeffries had a very interesting article in the newsletter. David Jeffries. Jeffrey, sorry, without the S. He had a very interesting article in the paper last Saturday, and he suggested that what was before us in Casement Park was something that couldn't work because the benefits for all the people would only happen if it was dispersed that way. So, when it comes to Casement Park, big decisions to be made, and if the GAA aren't prepared to go beyond their 17 million or thereabouts, then I think it's time for them to catch themselves on and realise that everybody else will get the benefit, and that's what I'd like to see. From my party's point of view, the party that I represent, felt there was no alternative to bringing down a devolved administration in order to push for necessary changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. We did so with a heavy heart. Because we believe in devolution. We did so because we felt that a huge step was necessary to bring attention to the economic and constitutional damage that was being wrought in Northern Ireland due to the policy and attention of the EU. We did so knowing that there was many who didn't grasp the rationale and many who refused to attempt to grasp the rationale as well. We did it despite the calls of many others who said the deal was done and couldn't be altered. We did it, and we proved them wrong. And our leader and our deputy leader did that there very directly, and we have the benefits of that. So there are negatives, yes, but there are benefits, and let's focus upon the benefits. In fact, the deal could be altered, and it was. In fact, the EU could come to terms with the changes, and they did. In fact, our government could achieve more than the Winter framework, and they did. So those are some of the three things that have happened. Let me be entirely clear: the work is not yet achieved. This House will be the place to make those changes, and our leader and others who have spoken said we will make the changes here, and I look forward to working alongside the Secretary of State and the Minister of State for Northern Ireland to ensure that those changes that we wish collectively to see can be done just right here in this place. I know my colleagues in the Assembly will be working to ensure that there are no restrictions to trade within this UK and our businesses can operate. We can receive Amazon deliveries, we can get our veterinary medication through the committee that's going to be set up for that purpose in mind, and the Honourable Member for North Antrim will be actively involved in that. Our trees and seeds, we've already had, I understand, 11 of those products already agreed, 21 are in the pipeline to be agreed, and others will follow. So there are things that are happening. The Green Lane issues as well, there's a very significant reduction in those, and the products that will be in there, at the minute it's 20%. I understand by September of this year it will drop to 5%. If there's constructive and positive ways forward, a company in Newton Ours, give you an example, the night that the party accepted at the executive that we would go with the deal, this gentleman who has 2 shops, one in Ours, one in Bangor, employed 12 people, he told me that it was a company in Manchester supplied him with 300 products, of which he had to do over 200 pieces of paperwork, almost 6,000 paper transactions for those products. They told him that as of the day that our party agreed and the bill went through this here at Westminster, that all of those paperwork were gone. So he can now has 300 of his products he can bring in without the paperwork. And another one who contacted me about the pet food, They were told that in 3 weeks' time, which is another week away, all those pet foods will be able to come in. So those are examples of how it's working. So let's look at the positives in relation to what we're doing.
Will the honourable member for Strangford also join me in welcoming the communication that both the Secretary of State and myself have received from a very prominent nursery selling plants and trees and shrubs in Northern Ireland, who were at the forefront of the campaign to have their issues and problems recognised. And since our agreement, since the publication of the command paper, they are seeing real improvements in terms of their access to plants and shrubs and trees, and their supply chains have improved already, even before the new measures are fully implemented.
I thank my right honourable friend and colleague for that, and he's absolutely right, and we all know who that, without mentioning that in the House, we all know who that person is and that company is, and they have a number of nurseries, and there are other nurseries within my constituency of Strangford who will also feel the benefits, as will others as well. So we have to look at those positives. In this House, the voice of Northern Ireland will not be silent when it comes to trying to find a way forward to improve things yet again and get more for the people of Northern Ireland from all communities. We need to achieve more in terms of economic drive, an entirely new funding mechanism and numerous other interventions. Again, the Secretary of State very helpfully at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee last week referred to the review of the Barnett consequential and a better way of doing that so that all the people of Northern Ireland can achieve the monies. These are the facts of the case. This address today does not deal with these, but deals with an equally important issue to many people in Northern Ireland, and that is our constitutional position. For many months there were those in the Irish government, indeed even from these benches, who tried to browbeat us with the threat of joint authority from Dublin. The newspaper headlines that screamed that steps were being taken to ensure that decisions were made in coordination with the Irish government concerning Northern Ireland, all stirring up a people who have never felt welcome within our own nation, and indeed who begin to feel unwanted within this union. If you listen to the hype and listen to all of today's motion is not to inform our King of anything that he doesn't know. He understands the constitutional position well, as his mother, Queen Elizabeth the Faithful, did, as Queen, who served her God and our people so well. The reason for this motion today is to make clear to those who have felt a disconnect from the government that there can be no joint authority and no movement without the issue of consent. It's really important that we do that. Of course, we hear the ramblings about the term at Sinn Féin, of course, the same absentee MPs who don't turn up here, of course, who don't take any decisions, who don't involve any select committees to discuss the ways forward. They've said the United is on the rise, and there may be the case, but it will not be because the people of this nation don't want us. It will be because the people of Northern Ireland have decided that's where the consent principle lies. So this humble address underlines the position of this government, a position that many have questioned. There's a Secretary of State for Northern Ireland responded to me recently. There's a rebuild of trust needed within the Unionist people. And this is merely one step in this journey. So I welcome the fact that the Minister of State for Northern Ireland and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland committed to that principle of building trust. I heard many people talking about how their identity was not wrapped in a flag, and that is entirely their right to say this, yet within this is a disparaging inference that their identity is so fragile. I know that you've heard this before, but I seek to remind people of what is whitewashed and been sought to be rewritten. We faced horrific grief and pain, people from every community. We faced lives of checking undercars, of seeing blue lights, of frantically trying to think of where your family are at a time when you heard some news on TV where a bomb had went off or there had been something had happened. We lived a life of heading to church and having men stationed at the doors to protect the congregation after Sunday services, and children who saw gunmen indiscriminately spraying a building, reloading and spraying their bullets once again, killing and wounding as people sought to pray. We lived a life in Northern Ireland of not going to get meat from the butchers on a Saturday afternoon and having a bomb going off, or having dinner at a local restaurant where you could be set alight by napalm. These are the lives that we all lived from Northern Ireland. And why are these things important? Because we're trying to find a new future and a new way forward. And my colleague and right honourable member for Lagan Valley referred to as a future which involves all of the community. And the last year was the first year where someone wasn't killed by terrorists. I hadn't realised that the right honourable member said that, but there's an indication of where we're going. So our identity is not fragile, but our history is. And what kept many of us going through that time was the knowledge that we would not bow to the terrorists, we would not cower before their demands, and that we would stay standing. And we have done that, and today we're doing that again in this chamber collectively, and from all political parties to ensure that as well. As someone, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we all know these cases, as someone who has lost loved ones to the troubles, and many of us on this side have, the constitutional issue is not a matter of the colour of a passport, but the matter of whether the shedding of blood and the grief of a mother was of worth or was in vain. For me, that's the key issue as I try to build for my children and for my grandchildren and for everybody else's children and everybody else's grandchildren from whatever side of the community they come from. That's a future that I want to see, and that's a future that I believe that my people want to see. Of whether standing against evil is honoured by this place or forgotten by this place. That is why this address today is so important, because it reminds the Unionist people who feel so downtrodden, unwanted and forgotten, that this union has not forsaken them, and that the government of this nation, of this great nation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, is prepared to stand against the tide of unification by stealth and uphold the principle of consent. And for that reason, I very much welcome it, and my party welcomes that today, because it's the right thing to do. The humble address is what we want, and I look forward to hearing from the Secretary.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and with the leave of the House, I rise to close the debate on this humble address, and I'm very grateful to everyone who has participated in it. This is a Unionist government, and we are steadfast in our belief that the best future for Northern Ireland will always be as an integral part of a strong and prosperous United Kingdom, even as we respect the legitimate rights of others to pursue another outcome. We are the most successful political and economic union in the world, something which I'm clear a majority of members of this House would agree on. The debate this afternoon has reiterated the unwavering support for the Union across the House. We've reaffirmed the importance of upholding the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all its strands. We've acknowledged the foundational importance of the Acts of Union 1800, including the economic provisions under Article 6, much as I listened to the words of members opposite. And we have recognised that joint authority is not provided for in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in respect to the UK and Irish government. Coming on, I'm most grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for his speech. We are united in congratulating the Right Honourable Gentleman for Lagan Valley, and we're absolutely united in wishing the First Minister and Deputy First Minister every success in their endeavours. It's been said several times by the Shadow Secretary of State and by others, never again. And I think we are all united in our hope that never again will Northern Ireland go without an executive. The Shadow Secretary of State particularly mentioned the all-island economy, which is a matter that has particular sensitivity for members opposite in the DUP, and the reference to the joint report. The Shadow Secretary of State asked about the effect of repealing the relevant section. The joint report and its provisions predated, as he knows, our departure from the EU. Now that we've left the EU, the withdrawal agreement makes provision in fulfilment of many of those matters. The joint report to which the Shadow Secretary of State referred has been superseded by that withdrawal agreement and by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Now, of course, I know I've not taught him anything he didn't know already, and I would say to him that at the moment, of course, we're in regular dialogue with the... I'll give you in a moment. We're in regular dialogue with the EU, and as far as we are aware, the EU is satisfied with the way we're proceeding. What I would say to him is at the moment, I've no reason to believe there'll be any significant consequences in repeal of that section, but I give way.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for that explanation, and of course I am aware that the joint report predated the Withdrawal Act, but if it was in effect rendered redundant by the Withdrawal Act, why did the Withdrawal Act make specific provision to have regard to the joint report?
I beg your pardon? Yeah, elements were relevant at the time, the Secretary of State has just mentioned to me. But what I would say to him is, alas, I was not the relevant minister at the time. I did the EU Withdrawal Act, but not the not the Withdrawal Agreement Act. But if I'm advised otherwise by officials after this debate, I shall certainly write to him and place a copy of the letter in the House. But I'm not expecting to be advised that there would be significant consequences, but I shall certainly take advice. I particularly appreciated the Shadow Secretary of State's exegesis of the Acts of Union, and I'm not a great historian, and I appreciated him running through those things. We are, of course, all absolutely united in our desire for a better future for Northern Ireland. The honourable gentleman, a spokesman for the SNP, welcomed the compromise and pragmatism of everyone involved. I don't think I will tease him as he's teased me on that particular point. And he made a very thoughtful speech about people's ability to indicate their consent or otherwise to membership of a particular state. And I think that's he raises some very interesting matters which I won't have time to get into. I particularly appreciated, of course, my right honourable friend, the leader of the DUP's speech. I think this is a very good day for unionism. Speaking as an English MP, even though I've been choosing to go to Northern Ireland since 2013, it's very easy as an English MP to neglect the union. And I think that what we've seen through this process is that actually the whole government, the whole House, has come far more deeply to appreciate the need to nurture the union. And I think today is a good day for the union. And I think the right honourable gentleman and his honourable and right honourable friends in the DUP have done a service to the whole union by highlighting these issues and forcing us all to confront the need to nurture the union, even as it is not one of the most prominent issues in English constituencies, I think it is fair to say. But I certainly pay tribute to him and his colleagues in what they have achieved. I think it is worth saying, since he made the point about the red lane and the need to improve further and move more goods out of it, which I'm absolutely all for doing, I think it is worth just reminding everyone that of who voted for the protocol bill. I think everyone in the DUP, I believe, voted for the protocol bill, and there's nods of assent. The protocol bill established the principle that there should be a red lane, and you know, I think we do need to remember that that red lane is legitimate, therefore. It's something which we should have all expected. In terms of some of the issues which have been invented, I think we have got enough practical problems in this life without inventing additional ones. I want to turn to the remarks of the honourable gentleman for North Down, because he said that Brexit is the original sin. And so I'm going to accept the temptation that he has put before me to respond on this point, because I think occasionally we get the opportunity to comment on matters of historical sin. And I hope that the House will forgive me if I say that, to me, the original sin was proceeding with the Maastricht Treaty and all it meant without getting consent. It was compounded by the mortal sin of proceeding with the Lisbon Treaty, positively against the expressed wishes of a number of populations. That's what brought me into politics. Positively establishing the European Constitution by another name against the expressed wishes of populations in referenda. So I take his point as Brexit as the original sin. And although I'm tempted to say I'm an unapologetic unionist, a waggish official earlier reminded me, but Minister, you've made a number of apologies. Apologies notably in relation to Ireland, but also I think I don't mind sharing with the House and the public that during the early days of my appointment to this role, I said to a number of stakeholder groups in Northern Ireland, and particularly in the area of Derry, Londonderry, yes, I am sorry that you've been put to as much trouble as you have through this withdrawal process. So I've great sympathy with what he says, but I suppose out of this whole process, if we can step back a little, there's a lesson for those who wish to make great constitutional changes, and that is take the public with you at all times. But I'm certainly not perfect in that regard myself. I, for one, however, wish to put all that behind us. I wish to put all that behind us and to move forward. The honourable gentleman for North Down mentioned the all-island economy and talked about the need for them to, the east-west and north-south, to operate in harmony. I'm of one mind with him. I'm absolutely all for free trade and removing all barriers to free trade, wherever that can be done consistent with democratic consent. Casement Park has come up a couple of times. We need to see a proper business case with a full statement of the costs which are involved. Clearly there has been inflation in the costs. We now need to see what the full bill would be. On revenue raising was part of the financial settlement tabled in December, the government's primary objective is to support stability and a fiscal sustainability through a restored executive which has the tools to deliver better outcomes for the people of Northern Ireland in an affordable way. That's why a condition of this package, specifically the quantum of debt to be written off, will be agreed on a proportionate basis to locally raised revenue generated from the implementation of the Executive's fiscal sustainability plan. The Honourable Gentleman for East Antrim made a very interesting speech, and I don't doubt that we've arrived where we are by a circuitous route. But here we are. I think we've got a happy day for unionism overall. And as the Right Honourable Gentleman, the leader of the DUP, said, we've got a great opportunity to go forward now and make Northern Ireland work for all the people and to persuade them in the context of those changing demographics that they would be well placed to continue to choose to remain within the United Kingdom. The Honourable Gentleman for North Antrim has set me a number of questions, and I don't wish to further return to the rabbit hole he mentioned on border polls. I think I will just refer to the opening remarks I made, which I think were crafted to avoid any kind of ambiguity. He asked, when will we see action? We have seen action. We have legislated twice already. We're here for this humble address. We will continue to take action. Specifically on the Veterinary Medicines Working Group, I will undertake to write to him before the week is out on the progress of establishing the Veterinary Medicines Working Group and to place that letter in the library so that others can see it, because I know it's a subject of the first importance and particularly to him. So I shall write to him to set out our progress towards establishing that working group. I gave officials very clear instructions that we were to proceed with great haste, as swiftly as possible, to the establishment of that group and the horticulture working group. The horticulture group is already established. We'll have further communication to do on that point. In relation to intertrade, it's dependent on the East-West Council. We will need to work through those issues, including across government, because he'll appreciate that for East-West work to be effective, we need to properly engage, particularly with our colleagues in the Department for Levelling Up and with the other devolved administrations. So let's get this thing right, and that means it's going to take just a little time, and I hope he can bear with me. But as I said in my opening remarks, I'm determined to proceed as swiftly as possible and to keep the House informed, including on the point about DARA. He's already undertaken to give me the examples that he's raised, and I look forward to processing those. His history is better than mine. He referred to the Home Rule debate in 1879. I just would say to him, let's hope we continue to do better than they did. They took 78 years to resolve some of those matters. We have already made swifter progress, and I am proud of it. I will.
Or that, of course, the Home Rule debates were brought to a cataclysmic end. These testament to that end, to the Great War of 1914. With regards to farm machinery, can he indicate to us, is he making progress with regards on that point? It was promised during the last legislative process that we went through. And can he confirm tonight that there's been a breakthrough on the sale of eggs? People might think this is cracking, but it's not. It's absolutely important. 80% of all eggs, 80% of all eggs hatched in Northern Ireland are actually sold here on the mainland.
Excellent.
And it is excellent. And if that was not the case, if there was a problem to do with veterinary science or veterinary medicines or salmonella, that matter of sales would be brought to an immediate end. So I would like him to confirm that there's been a derogation this evening with regards to the sale of eggs across the United Kingdom for Northern Ireland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not have any breaking news to share with him tonight. But I am most grateful to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, for that joke, which people will recognise as being characteristic of him. I have slightly exceeded the time which I intended to take. I listened very carefully to the speech of the Honourable Lady for Upper Bann, and I've considerable sympathy with the points that she makes. So I think I accepted in my opening remarks that this is a hard compromise for Unionists and Eurosceptics, but I remain convinced and resolute that we have taken forward measures which respect the legitimate interests of unionism in Northern Ireland and across the whole UK, and which move matters forward. The Honourable Gentleman for Strangford has always made a great speech, My honourable friend for Wokingham caused me in his challenge to doubt myself on the issue of VAT, so I just do want to absolutely affirm the position. The position on VAT is clear. The framework secured legally binding changes so that Northern Ireland benefits from the same VAT and alcohol taxes as in the rest of the UK. These have been used to introduce reliefs on energy-saving materials, to apply alcohol duty reforms UK-wide, to ensure draft relief applies for beer sold in all UK pubs. These benefits are being felt now in Northern Ireland and across the UK. The issue in relation to EORs, which the Honourable Gentleman from North Antrim raised, I would be glad to return to. My right honourable friend for Witham raised plant trade. I'm pleased to say to my right honourable friend that businesses have welcomed, like her, the measures in the command paper. Earlier this month, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, received a letter from prominent Northern Ireland horticultural businesses which said, thankfully, with the restoration of the executive, we are already experiencing positive feedback from our suppliers in Great Britain. They went on, they are optimistic about trading with us without any challenges. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me be expressly clear once again that Northern Ireland's position is based on consent. The task for those of us who want to see the Union prosper is to consider how we broaden support for Northern Ireland's constitutional position in a world that is very different to the one in which the agreement was reached in 1998. And no one could really add to the speech made with great skill by my right honourable friend, the leader of the DUP. Central to that approach has to be to make Northern Ireland work and to flourish, and to do so for everyone, regardless of their community background or their political aspirations, which we absolutely respect. The Government will continue to work to deliver the suite of commitments made under the Safeguarding the Union command paper, and continue to work with the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly members to improve the lives of people living in Northern Ireland. And I once again commend the humble address to the House.
The question is that an humble address be presented to His Majesty as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.